Hey guys, this is Starvatik. How are you all? Please support to subscribe this channel for watching new interesting stories. This video includes a self-recorded human introduction in the first 30 seconds, followed by AI generated narration for creative storytelling purposes. So in this video, we will see third part. What if Harry Potter fell into darkness after losing everything? But before we start, if you want more stuff like this, then please support to subscribe this channel and share with your friends. Now let's start the video.
Here is short summary. Haunted by the death of a friend, Harry turns away from the light he once fought for. As his friends struggle to hold together, the true heir of Slytherin walks a darker path, one that could save the world, or destroy it. But before we start, if you want more stuffs like this, then please support to subscribe this channel and share with your friends. Let's start the video. Harry was really sore the day after being ambushed. His body ached, his skin was bruised, and he had lost quite a bit of blood. Despite having spent the entire night healing his bruises and cuts, it didn't change how his body felt like it had been put through several rounds with a champion kickboxer. I can't believe someone attacked you on your way to the Gryffindor Tower, Susan said in astonishment. It was breakfast, and everyone was sitting around the Gryffindor table in their usual positions. Harry had a large plate of pancakes, French toast, eggs, muffins, and orange juice. He normally didn't eat so many carbohydrates, but he'd exhausted his magic last night and needed to replenish. While not a well-known fact, food, like rest, was a great way to help replenish lost magic. I'm sorry, Daphne apologized. You were attacked because you walked me to my dorm. If you hadn't. If I hadn't, then I wouldn't have gotten such valuable information, Harry interrupted. Please don't apologize. Not only was this incident not your fault, but I learned a lot. Tracy made a face. What could you have possibly learned from nearly getting killed? I'm with her. Terry pointed at Tracy. Harry chuckled. Because it shows how desperate the person who's trying to kill me is getting. It also tells me that the person who created that area-wide illusion at Hogsmeade is the same one who tried to bury me under the Shrieking Shack. How do you figure that? Asked Lisa. Deductive reasoning, Harry replied. First off, there have been 3 attacks in several weeks. Each time there has been an attack, I was there, either as the one being attacked, or as part of a group that was attacked. Now, when you look at it like this, how many people do you think there can be that would so blatantly launch attacks of this nature? Lisa hesitated for a moment. 1. Nodding, Harry lifted his hand and raised a single finger. That's right. 1. There aren't many people who would attack others like this. If there was more than one psychopathic killer on the loose, then it would mean the DMLE isn't doing their job, which I know for a fact that they are. So, there's no possibility that the attacks on you and the attack at Hogsmeade were separate incidents. Blaise asked. I doubt it. I mean, it is possible, but the chances of these attacks being perpetrated by 2 separate people is unlikely. You mentioned this person being desperate, Neville prodded. How do you figure they're getting desperate? Because of the nature of their attacks, Harry answered. Their first attack was a lot more subtle. They tricked Professor McGonagall into giving me a letter that had me travel out to where no one else was located, and then attempted to kill me. Granted, dropping a building on me isn't subtle, but the Shrieking Shack is old, so it would have been easy to make it look like an accident had I died. The second attack wasn't as subtle, but it was still a brilliant method of assassination. By casting an area-wide illusion that affected everyone within a certain radius, they made it look more like a terrorist attack than an assassination. Harry paused to make sure everyone was following him. Tracy and Terry were leaning forward, and Hannah, Lisa, Astoria, and Ginny were staring at him. Luna looked at him for but a moment before going back to whatever she was reading. The Quibbler, it looked like. Even Blaise was looking right into his eyes. Underneath the table, Harry felt a hand gripping his robes. That would be Daphne. He continued. If I had died then, I would have just been another casualty. It would have been big, sure, but no one would have believed that I was the target all along. However, the last attack was an all-out assault on just me. Not only that, but they attacked me inside of Hogwarts. There are hundreds of students and numerous faculty, and that's not accounting for the many portraits, several of which witnessed the attack. This person has all but said I'm their target. Now that the staff and portraits know, everyone is going to be extra alert. Which means the chances are taking you out have decreased, Daphne said suddenly, clarity entering her voice. Right. Harry nodded. Sounds like this assassin has screwed the pooch, Tracy said. It was just as his friend had said. They had, indeed, screwed the pooch. However, the assault had also revealed something else, which he didn't mention. Whoever had attacked them was not a professional assassin. They were intelligent, insanely so perhaps, but someone experienced in assassination knew never to let desperation fuel their attempts. Ahem. Excuse me, Madame Umbridge's familiar voice said from behind them. I couldn't help but overhear your conversation. Mr. Potter, I would like to see you in my office after breakfast. Harry froze, but he quickly mastered himself and smiled. Of course, Headmistress Umbridge. I'll head over to the headmistress' office once breakfast is finished. Very good. As the headmistress walked off, Harry pondered what her request meant. Was he going to be in trouble for last night? No, that couldn't be it. Umbridge knew of the political power he wielded. The likelihood of her trying to get him in trouble were almost nil. There had to be another reason. Harry, are you really going to meet with Umbridge? Asked Susan. I don't have much choice. He shrugged. She is the headmistress. That said, Daphne, would you mind accompanying me? You say that as if I wasn't planning to accompany you in the first place, Daphne said, shrugging. She and Harry shared a smile. A blushing Susan looked at the two of them. Would you mind if I went with you? Not at all, Daphne said before Harry could answer. In fact, as the niece of Amelia Bones, your presence might help. A look of relief washed over Susan. Harry discreetly glanced back and forth between the two girls as they began speaking. He was clearly missing something. I'll never understand girls. Harry, along with Daphne and Susan, headed to the headmistress's office. It had changed a lot since he'd last been there. Pink. That was the first thing he noticed upon entering the headmistress's office. Blinding, bright, disgusting, and mind-scarring pink. It was everywhere. The walls, the ceiling, even the floor was pink. If that was all, then perhaps Harry could have handled it. However, on top of every millimeter of the room being pink, the walls were also covered in kitty portraits. They were all over the place. Meowing kitties, kitties licking their paws, kitties playing with each other. It was a regular kittenpalooza. Harry almost lost his mind. No sane person would have a room like this. It was, he didn't even think horrendous could accurately describe this place. Daphne and Susan appeared to be of like mind. They were clutching his hands as though they were lifelines. Sitting behind the headmistress's desk, which was also pink, Umbridge looked up and smiled. Ah, Mr. Potter, and Ms. Greengrass and Bones. The smile left for a brief moment, but it was soon put back in place, though there was a noticeable twitch. I had not realized you two were coming as well. Harry quickly mastered himself. My apologies, headmistress. I asked them to come because your rule forbade anyone from wandering around on their own. Umbridge's lips became pursed, as though she had swallowed a limo. Yes, well, I suppose it can't be helped. However, you and I have much to discuss. Since they came together, they can also leave while I speak with you. But headmistress, Daphne intervened smoothly. If we left Harry now, he wouldn't have anyone to walk with him and would end up breaking your rule. Before the headmistress could open her mouth, Daphne continued. I'm also sure that a woman as busy as yourself can't afford to walk him all the way to his next class. It would be quite rude of us to force you into doing something like that. Umbridge remained still for a moment. She could dispute Daphne's words, but doing so would mean going against the daughter of the Greengrass family. From a purely political standpoint, it was reckless. No, it went beyond reckless. It was the dumbest thing someone could do. Why, you bring up a good point, Umbridge said, her smile becoming fixed. However, I still need to speak with Mr. Potter alone. Daphne opened her mouth again, but Harry beat her. It's okay, Daph. Why don't you and Susan wait outside? Are you sure? Susan asked. We don't mind staying with you. Gracing them both with a smile, Harry said, I'm sure. Sighing, Daphne relented. Very well. However, my father is quite interested in what happens to you, so please be sure to let me know if something happens during your conversation, she said loudly enough for Umbridge to hear, but soft enough that it sounded like she hadn't meant Umbridge to hear. Harry almost chuckled at the woman's pale face. Don't worry. I will. When Susan and Daphne left, Harry walked up to Umbridge and offered a respectful inclination of his head. I apologize for the issue just now. You said that you wished to speak with me. Yes, that is correct. Umbridge coughed into her hand. I've heard that you were attacked last night. For a moment, Harry wondered how she'd heard of this. Could she have orchestrated the attack? The thought fled as quickly as it came. No, she couldn't have been the one behind this. Aside from the attacks happening before she'd arrived, Umbridge lacked the capacity and the motive to assassinate him. That meant there was another reason. I was. You were alone. To my shame, Harry admitted. I had walked Daphne back to the Slytherin dorm, but there was no one left to walk me to the Gryffindor tower. Umbridge, much to Harry's surprise, nodded. That's good. It was quite noble of you to escort Ms. Greengrass back to her dorm. I'm also pleased to see that you aren't injured yourself. While he was trying to figure out Umbridge's angle, Harry replied, Thank you. It was quite the harrowing experience, but fortunately, I was saved by a passing teacher before the situation could take a turn for the worst. Yes, you were quite fortunate, which leads me to my point. Coughing into her hand, the toad-like woman said, As an important member of the wizarding world, it is imperative that you remain safe at all times. I'd like to ask that you not do something like this again. It took Harry a moment, but like a flash of lightning, he realized what was going on. Umbridge was a toady. She wasn't a leader, but a follower who clung to the most powerful person she could. At Hogwarts, the one with all of the political power was him, ergo, Umbridge was but key. Dotting him. She was trying to ingratiate herself to him. It was so obvious that he was kicking himself for missing it. That said, I can use this. You're correct, headmistress. It pains me, but I wasn't being cautious enough. It's a mistake that I won't make again. The headmistress seemed awfully pleased, as her beaming smile suggested. Excellent. I am so pleased that you see things my way. Oh, yes. Harry nodded emphatically. I certainly understand why following the rules is so important now, and in fact, I was just thinking of how this school could be much safer if we added a few more rules. Truly, Umbridge said, appearing curious. Yes. Not only would these rules help keep the students safe, but they'd also hold the benefit of making you the most beloved headmistress to ever hold this position. Now Umbridge was leaning forward. As that's so, what are these suggestions of yours? Hook, line, sinker. With a polite smile, Harry gave Umbridge the same speech that he had given to Walburga's portrait, and then he suggested several rules to help implement them. He may or may not have used a bit of magic to make Umbridge a tad more agreeable. Several policy changes were implemented at Hogwarts. The most shocking was the promotion of inter-house relationships, which was one of the many topics that Harry had spoken to Umbridge about. Using his alliance with the Greengrass, Zabini, and Bones households, Harry had convinced Umbridge of the benefits to inter-house relationships. There may have also been a small threat placed in there along with a slight magical impulse. This change in policy had resulted in the reopening of the all-house common room. Several rules had been put in place, such as students had to be walking with members of their house when leaving the common room. However, there had been no rules stating that students of other houses couldn't walk together. This meant students had to walk in groups of at least 4 if they were with someone from another house. It was killing 2 birds with 1 stone, as far as Harry was concerned. The other policies that had been changed were mere minor suggestions. They did nothing in the long run. Harry had merely used them as a means of disguising his agenda from Umbridge. To further enhance the reputation of this policy, and to increase Umbridge's fame, Harry had used Andromeda to discreetly send the Daily Prophet the information about these changes. With the letter was a generous sum of money, along with the suggestion that they paint her policies in the best light possible. Which explained why the front page of the Daily Prophet that morning had been titled, Headmistress Umbridge Takes the Reins and Heals Hogwarts. By Castaigne Barbage. Good things are happening at Hogwarts, ladies and gentlemen. Since Headmaster Dumbledore's resignation from the position, Headmistress Umbridge has become a beacon of hope for the students of Hogwarts. She's enacted new policies to help better the school and ensure the safety of the children. These policies include the rule that students may not walk alone on their way to class. This was done as a method of ensuring that students always have someone with them in the event of an unprecedented attack. On top of being of helping keep students safe, she has begun to implement policies to help expand inter-house relationships. Rumor has it that the suggestion came from Lucius Malfoy, who was the person that helped put Headmistress Umbridge in the position as headmistress in the first place. The article went on to praise the headmistress and Lucius Malfoy for their insight and desire to help keep the children at Hogwarts safe. The praise it offered was quite lavish indeed. Blaise put down his paper and gestured to it. "I'm guessing this is your doing." Harry smiled as jotted down some notes on his homework assignment for Snape. It was a revision essay on one of the more complicated potions they were learning. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Right," Blaise said, holding back a chuckle. "I have to admit, this was a pretty brilliant move. I haven't received a letter from Mum yet, but I'm sure I'll get one soon enough telling me to praise you." "Is something going on?" asked Tracy. It was lunchtime, but rather than going to the Great Hall, they were all eating their lunch down in the Chamber of Secrets. Susan and Hannah had asked the house elves to make them something. Then they brought it down for everyone. This was done not just so they could speak in private, but also so they could work on their homework while they ate. "Harry has just done something that I can't figure out whether it was crazy brilliant or just plain crazy," Daphne said. "It's definitely crazy brilliant," Blaise said. Not only did he have the Daily Prophet make the headmistress out to be a saint, but he implied that the reason was because Lucius had put her up to it. "I did no such thing," Harry said. "I found out through the grapevine that Lucius was the one who managed to get Umbridge installed as our headmistress in the first place. This was done all under his suggestion. It's only natural that the Daily Prophet would conclude that he was the one responsible for having her implement these new changes that promote inter-house relationships." "But doesn't that paint Lucius in a good light?" asked Lisa. "Not if you're a dark family," Daphne said. "Many of the policies that Umbridge put in place are ones that no dark family would agree with. That it's been rumored to have been done on Lucius's suggestion means he's betrayed the dark family factions that have allied with him. He'll be in hot water for a while. Of course, that means he's going to have his hands tied placating his allies. It might also make him act rashly," Harry said. This had been done with the purpose of keeping Lucius in check. Sirius had told him about what had happened during the meeting several months ago, when Lucius Malfoy had been attacked by several light side families. The members might have been imperious, but it didn't change how Lucius's prestige had skyrocketed as a result. Now he was being hailed as the savior of Hogwarts, but he'd taken a hit from his allies for that very reason, or he would be taking the hit soon enough. He would have to do something, and soon, or his reputation would continue to plummet in the eyes of his peers. There was a chance that he would use this to his advantage by stating that he was trying to get on everyone's good side, but that ran the risk of him being required to do something to prove his words. Lucius Malfoy owned the largest dark family voting bloc. However, that didn't mean his allies wouldn't turn on him if he didn't support their cause. One of them might even decide to stab him in the back, either figuratively or literally. Harry had asked Sirius to keep an eye on him during House of Noble meetings. He didn't expect anything to happen there, though. If Lucius made a move, it would be in a backdoor deal with someone, away from prying eyes. The ball was now in Lucius's court. All Harry could do was prepare himself for the incoming volley. "Oi, Harry!" Tracy shouted. "Why are you staring into space? Come over here and help me. I can't figure out what Flitwick is asking us to do." Harry sighed, and then he stood up. "All right. What are you having trouble with?" "The whole thing." He sighed again. His work was never finished, or so it seemed. Nothing happened for the next several weeks. It was the middle of spring, March to be exact, and everything had become bright and green again. The chill of winter had vanished completely, leaving only the crisp freshness that came from a new season. Harry had remained diligent, and not just on his studies. He'd been expecting something to happen soon, though what that something was, he didn't know. Yet a month had passed since his article on Lucius and Umbridge, and nothing had happened. There had been no announcements, no attacks, nothing. Harry wasn't sure what he had been expecting. However, silence was not one of them. Umbridge either didn't read the news, or hadn't been informed of what was happening. She was soaking up the adoration of the students. It seemed as if her popularity had gone to her head. That might make her harder to control, but Harry believed the benefits outweighed the cons. If she was busy dealing with students, then it meant she would have less time to bother him and his friends. That morning was the same as any other. Harry had been sitting with his friends, discreetly watching Umbridge as she made her rounds before sitting down at the faculty table. On his suggestion, the headmistress had started to make daily rounds at each table during breakfast, lunch, and dinner. He had told her that talking to the students would help her get a feel for how they were responding to her policy changes. Thus far, not only had it worked, but Umbridge had taken to it well. She really is a toady. Perhaps it was because she had grown so comfortable in her position as senior undersecretary, but Madame Umbridge didn't seem to have any real ambition. Although, thinking on it, maybe she simply liked the position that was second from the top because it gave her power without giving her the same responsibilities that came from being Minister for Magic. That didn't answer the question of why she had become the headmistress, though. I suppose it doesn't matter. In the grand scheme of things, Umbridge is just a pawn. She's here to distract people from Lucius Malfoy's real objective. The problem was finding out what that objective was. Sirius hadn't reported anything suspicious happening at the House of Noble meetings. Of course, it wasn't like Harry had expected Lucius to make any under-the-table plays there. No, if Lucius had a hidden agenda, it would be done where no one else was looking, and he wouldn't know about it until after it had already happened. In other words, being proactive was going to be impossible. He'd have to be reactive. I hate being forced to react to a situation. It's much better to stop something from happening before it can happen. Hey, Harry, Blaise started. He was sitting next to Tracy and had a large plate of pancakes in front of him. Do you mind if I asked you to practice dueling with me after classes today? Harry came to himself again. He didn't even think before nodding. Sure thing. I could probably do with a sparring partner myself. Hey. Tracy gave Blaise a rather unappealing grin. What's this? Blaise is working to improve his dueling skills. Now I've seen everything. While Blaise sometimes took part in the games that Harry concocted to help increase his friend's magical talents and reflexes, more often than not, he opted to sit out. Harry got the feeling that he was like his mother. Blaise probably preferred subterfuge and misdirection than outright confrontation. Rather than get agitated, Blaise shrugged in a nonchalant manner befitting his personality. I've become aware that you can't always rely on getting others to fight for you. There might come a time when I have to use my own skills instead of someone else's. That's a mature way of looking at things, Daphne said. It's also true. We should be prepared for anything, especially since Harry is a trouble magnet. Harry froze. That's true, Hannah agreed. Harry's always getting into trouble of some kind. I think half the stuff that happens to us is because of Harry, Tracy added her own input. I'm sorry about that, Harry apologized quietly. I know I've gotten us into a lot of dangerous situations. It wasn't my intention, but I can't deny that. Everyone present suddenly paled. Before Harry could speak again, Tracy was waving her hands in front of her face as though warding off a fly. No, it's okay. I didn't mean that in a bad way. Well, I mean, getting into trouble isn't good, but it's like, you know, we don't mind if trouble follows you everywhere you go, so, yeah, I'm just gonna shut up now. That is a sound decision, Daphne said. I'm glad to know you can figure out when you're putting your foot in your mouth. Tracy's slumped shoulders were reminiscent of someone weighed down by lead weights. That's a harsh thing to say. It's also true, Terry said. No one asked you, Boot. Tracy snapped. Classes went by slowly that day, which Harry realized was because he'd already finished all of his work. In some ways, he and his friends were ahead of the game. This meant that he didn't really have anything to do in class. He spent most of his time either meditating while the teachers lectured them, or creating transmutation circles within his mind. By the time classes were over, he was more than happy to head down to the Chamber of Secrets and practicing dueling with Blaise. Expelliarmus. Harry dodged a jet of red light that flew from the tip of Blaise's wand. His friend followed the spell up with an impedimenta, trying to chain the two spells together. Sadly, it wasn't a seamless chain. Expelliarmus was signified by the wand movements of a diagonal downward arc, and then following through with a clockwise spiral that went inward in a thrust. Meanwhile, Impedimentia was cast by a simple slashing motion. While it was possible to chain Impedimentia with Expelliarmus, the opposite wasn't possible. It made Blaze's spell chain clumsy. After dodging the first spell, Harry slipped around the second. He then aimed his wand at the floor around Blaze's feet and called out, Augmentee. Water spouted from the tip, splashing all over the floor around his opponent's feet. Harry then quickly chained Augmentee with Incarcerus. Blaze did his best to move out of the way, but with the floor so wet and slippery, not only could he not dodge, but he slipped as well. The result ended with Blaze bound by rope and lying on the wet floor. You need to be more wary of the spells you're using, Harry said as he undid the binding spell and dried off Blaze and the floor with a drying charm. You can't just cast randomly. Certain spells can't be chained together because the wand movements don't flow together as smoothly. It takes more time to cast them since you have to get your wand into position after casting the previous spell. You want to chain together spells where each wand movement flows into the next one. Like you did with your Augmentee and Incarcerus spells. Blaze nodded as he stood up, wincing. He must have fallen on his hip. Harry wouldn't be surprised if his friend was sporting a bruise the next morning. That's right. He nodded. The Augmentee spell's wand movement works well with the Incarcerus. However, the reverse isn't true. An Incarcerus wouldn't be a good first spell to use since it would mean having to add an extra wand motion to cast the Augmentee. I think I understand, Blaze murmured, cupping his chin. A spell that can be cast immediately after the first without adding an extra motion to my wand makes it more efficient. Right, and that's why we call it a chain spell. How can I properly cast chains, though? Blaze frowned. It's not like I'll be able to think up chains in the middle of a fight. True, but if you create chains in advance and practice them until they become second nature, you'll be able to use them during a duel without thinking about it. Makes sense. Thanks. You're welcome. Since it seemed they were done sparring, Harry wandered over to the lounge and sat on the couch. Daphne and Astoria were sitting together. It looked like they were talking about something, though Astoria, who'd been doing most of the talking, clammed up when he arrived. Don't stop on my account, Harry said. You can keep conversing. If you're sure. Astoria shrugged and turned back to her sister. So, like I was saying, Sirius Black is a total hunk. You're doing that to upset me, aren't you? He interrupted. Astoria turned her head and smiled at him. I've no idea what you're talking about. Right. Harry sighed. I'm surprised to see Blaze working so hard at something that requires him to exercise, Daphne said before her sister could make a snarky remark. Is that really so unusual? Harry asked. He'd never seen Blaze spar outside of their games of magic tag, and while he did sometimes sit out, he'd never struck Harry as being lazy. Daphne nodded. Blaze doesn't like getting his hands dirty. When we were younger, every time one of the other noble children picked a fight with him, Blaze would never outright fight with them. He'd convince someone else to fight them for him, usually by spreading a few well-placed rumors. Being a neutral family, Blaze's and Daphne's parents ran in some of the same circles, so it was only natural that they would know each other from a young age. He also wasn't surprised to learn that Blaze had always been the sort to fight indirectly. Even so, it did surprise him that he'd been like that even when they were younger. It must be his mother's influence. While he sat with Astoria and Daphne, the others were located around the table. Neville and Terry appeared to be doing homework, but it looked like Tracy, Lisa, Luna, and Hannah were playing a game of exploding snaps. Of course, Harry only knew this because he could see something exploding in poor Tracy's face. The other three laughed at her. Yeah, laugh it up, she grumbled. You won't be laughing after my big comeback. You say that all the time, Hannah said. Whatever. I think Tracy has more nargles than usual. I don't even know what that means. Because it was already evening, they weren't able to remain in the Chamber of Secrets for long. Dinner was coming soon. They left about 2 hours after arriving. As they were traveling down the main hall, several figures followed them through the portraits. Okay, Terry mumbled, that's kind of creepy. I'm with you, Boot. What the bloody hell are they following us for? Asked Tracy. Daphne didn't say anything, but her sigh told Harry what he needed to know. If Tracy had been in reach of her hand, there was little doubt that she would have suffered a slight concussion. I wonder if something's happened. Lisa said. You mean like another attack? Asked Tracy. Yeah, I thought the person attacking was after Harry, Neville said with a frown. If they're after Harry, why would they attack someone else? Who knows? Tracy shook her head and gave him a helpless gesture. As they were turning a corner, Professors McGonagall and Flitwick rushed around a corner several meters out. They turned their heads, and, spotting them, made a beeline for the group. Where have you lot been? Asked Professor McGonagall. Her voice sounded more harried than Harry was used to. There was an urgency in it that he rarely heard. We were just studying, Harry said. Why? Did you need us for something? Harry frowned. Has something happened? Yes, something has happened, Professor McGonagall stated. I need all of you to return to your common rooms immediately. It didn't look like now was the time to argue, so Harry and the others said their goodbyes and parted ways. Yet even as he, Astoria, and Neville walked up to the Gryffindor common room, he couldn't help but wonder. What happened that has Professor McGonagall so spooked? Amelia sat behind her desk. It was late, but she still had a lot of work to do. The recent string of disappearances in London had increased, although it looked like the killer had changed locations again. This time they were on the opposite side of London, leading Amelia to believe that whoever the killer was, they must have been a witch or wizard. The only way anyone could have changed locations so quickly was if they used apparition or a portkey. She had several of her best Aurors on the case, including Kingsley and his partner, Tonks. While Tonks was still wet behind the ears, Kingsley had been an Auror for over 2 decades, and he'd fought bravely during the war against Voldemort and his Death Eaters. The number of times he had saved her life was uncountable. If it weren't for him, she'd have probably died after her husband had been killed. Some people had once joked about how Kinglesey had been her rebound. Those people were fools. There had never been any romance between her and Kingsley, just a respect between two people who had fought together during one of the worst war in recent history. Rubbing her eyes, Amelia tried to decide whether or not she should take a pepper-up potion. She had several on hand. However, they had a notorious habit of causing people to crash when taken in excess, and she'd already had 2. It was while she debated on the merits of downing another pepper-up potion that something happened. Someone called her by Flo. Amelia, a voice crackled from the fireplace. Amelia Bones. Standing up, Amelia moved around her desk, and walked past the table to her feet. Her feet padded along the soft carpet as she wandered past a comfortable-looking couch, which she used quite often to sleep on when she stayed overnight at her office. Finally, she reached the fireplace and knelt down. Professor McGonagall, Amelia said in surprise. To what do I owe the pleasure? The haggardness of Professor McGonagall's face was visible even through the flame. Sunken eyes. Hollow cheeks. It was enough to worry Amelia. Has something happened? Indeed, something has happened. Professor McGonagall sighed. I know you have been busy, but would it be possible for you to come over to Hogwarts? I'd rather not speak of this using the flow. Someone might be able to overhear us. While it was a unique skill, there was a magical ability known as flow tapping. By following the magic pathways that connected one fireplace to another with a thread generated from the tip of a wand, a person could overhear a specific conversation. Talented witches and wizards could even link their wand to multiple fireplaces at once. It was a constant worry for Amelia. As head of the DMLE, there were always people trying to tap her fireplace. Since flow tapping created only a thin, invisible thread, it was nearly impossible to detect, and no one had been able to create an enchantment that blocked people from tapping someone else's fireplace. That said, a tap would be disconnected once a flow call ended, and it wasn't like anyone would know when Amelia was receiving a flow call. Still, there was always the risk of someone overhearing something potentially disastrous. That was the reason she never spoke of anything that could cause problems if they came to light over the flow. Amelia glanced longingly at her pepper-up potion sitting on her desk, sighed, and then said, "That's fine. I'll be right over." She arrived at Hogwarts 5 minutes later. The flow network had been connected to the headmaster's office, which was a disgusting shade of pink and full of kittens. Amelia would have shuddered in revulsion, but something about the room stopped her cold. The two corpses. One of them was, quite clearly, Madame Umbridge. The woman was sitting at her desk, slumped over as if she'd fallen asleep. Her face was turned toward Amelia, however, and it looked nothing like someone peacefully dreaming the day away. Wide eyes stared soullessly at nothing. Her mouth was agape and slack, as though all the muscles in her jaw had inexplicably relaxed. What's more, her face held the deathly pallor of a corpse. The other corpse was Androgeus Antus, the person that she had convinced Minister Fudge to let become the Dada teacher after Remus's forced resignation. Unlike Umbridge, he was lying on the floor. He was on his back. There was a wand lying beside him. Madame Pomfrey was leaning over Antus and casting a slew of spells. Some of them Amelia recognized, but most of them she couldn't make heads or tails out of. They were likely diagnoses spells to figure out the cause of death. Amelia closed her eyes and counted to 10. Professor McGonagall, can you tell me what happened here? Professor McGonagall sighed and looked at Madame Pomfrey. What have you discovered? Standing up, Madame Pomfrey offered a quick summary of her findings. Both of them were killed by the killing curse. The one who cast it appears to have been Professor Antus. I've checked his wand's history, and it looks like he cast the killing curse twice, which leads me to believe he cast it once on Madame Umbridge and once on himself. Amelia couldn't believe her ears. There's no way Antus would do that. I know him. He abhorred killing. It's why he quit being a hit wizard. It's possible that he was Imperiist, Madame Pomfrey said, though she didn't sound convinced. However, the magic from the killing curse wiped out all traces of foreign magic. Amelia wanted to tear her hair out. Instead, she pinched the bridge of her nose. She didn't believe that Antus had killed himself. The very idea was preposterous. More than likely, Madame Pomfrey's idea that he'd been Imperiist was spot on. The question was, who had impressed him and why? I wonder, where are the students? Amelia asked. In their house common rooms, Professor McGonagall said. We had them all sent there as soon as we found these two like this. Bring them all out, Amelia said. Take them to the Great Hall. Professor McGonagall looked at her with wide eyes. What? Why? Because one of them isn't a student, Amelia said. Her proclamation brought a stunned silence, broken only by the meowing of the kittens. Neither of the professors seemed capable of making heads or tails of her statement. They stared at her with uncomprehending eyes. Amelia became impatient. What are you two waiting for? Go now. Get the students into the Great Hall before something happens to them. Yes, Professor McGonagall said at last. You're right, Madame Pomfrey. Inform Phileas and Severus that they are to take their students to the Great Hall. I'll tell Professor Sprout while I'm on my way to the Gryffindor Tower. I'll inform Professor Sprout, Amelia said. I still know the way to the Hufflepuff's den. Professor McGonagall didn't argue. Very well. As they left the headmaster's office, all three of them split ways. Amelia rushed to the Hufflepuff den. Time was of the essence. They needed to hurry. Otherwise they ran the risk of letting whoever their perpetrator was go free. No one knew what was going on. Even so, everyone knew that something had happened. All of the students had been sent straight to their dorms by their head of houses, even the 7th years and people who had been attending class. The Gryffindor common room was filled to the brim with people. Everyone was either sitting or standing in clumps, chatting as they tried to figure out what was going on. Harry was sitting on the couch with Neville and Astoria. While Neville was reading a book on dueling and wand care, Harry was helping Astoria with her homework. Most people probably wouldn't have, not with the way Astoria treated him, but he wanted to get on her good side. Also, she was still Daphne's sister. No one actually knows who, precisely, created the disarming charm, Harry said. The sad truth is that there's so much mixed information that it's unlikely any of our books are correct. Some historians have claimed the spell was invented by Merlin himself, while others believe its first widespread use was in Madagascar during the 11th century. Astoria's homework was a 1-foot-long revision on the history of the disarming charm, Expelliarmus. She'd come to Harry asking him to help her check her facts by telling her what he knew of the spell. While he lectured her on the disarming charm's history, Astoria was reading from her parchment, eyes scrolling as though she were following his lecture on paper. Regardless of whether or not any of this is true, the fact remains that this spell didn't become popular until it was used by Elizabeth Smudgeling in duel during the 26th annual dueling championship in 1379. Astoria frowned. I don't have any information on Elizabeth Smudgeling. You'd need to read her biography for more information on her, Harry said. Biting her lip for a moment, Astoria eventually nodded. I still need 3 more inches, so I think adding information about her would be a good idea. Smart choice, Harry agreed. I did the same thing for my essay on the disarming charm's history last year. Really? In that case, maybe I won't add information about her. Then how will you add 3 extra inches? Astoria huffed and crossed her arms. I'll find something else to write about. Hiding what must have been a smile behind his book, Neville said, you two act a lot like a pair of bickering siblings. Wah! Astoria's eyes bulged before narrowing. We do not. There's no way I'd ever act like this jerkwad's sister. You know if I married Daphne, I'd become your brother, don't you? Harry said. And weren't you trying to convince me that I should marry her? Astoria's cheeks flared up. That's different. How so? It just is. Okay. As they continued to chatter, someone walked down the stairs from the girls' dormitory. It was Ginny. She looked around, clutching a hand to her chest, and then spotted them over by the fireplace. She made a beeline for them, weaving her way between the numerous people who were also sitting around. Harry, Ginny said hesitantly. Can I talk to for a moment? Frowning at the uncertainty in the girl's voice, he stood up and gestured at her. Sure. What's up? Can you hold on to this for me? Huh. Harry frowned when something was thrust into his hands. It didn't look like anything special. It was just a small book, similar in many ways to a diary. It was pink and had white polka dots. There really wasn't anything particular about its appearance. The hair on his arms prickled. A thrill ran down his spine. His fingers tingled as though he'd experienced an electric shock. This is. Harry didn't even get to finish that thought before he felt a tug on his navel, like a hook that had suddenly wrapped around him and yanked. The world became distorted, blurry. All he could see were Ginny's green eyes and the not quite right smile on her face. His feet suddenly slammed into hard ground. Unprepared, Harry fell forward. He wasn't even given time to orient himself before something slammed into his back, sending what felt like a static shock through his entire body, causing his muscles to spasm and seize up. It felt like every cell in his body was being electrocuted by several thousand volts. The feeling subsided, but Harry felt numb. He fell to his knees, and then onto his stomach. His face struck the ground with a harsh smack, though he didn't feel it. He couldn't feel much of anything. A pair of shoes appeared in front of his face, his vision blurred as he was overcome with exhaustion, and then he was engulfed in darkness. Daphne sat with Blaise and Tracy. They didn't know what was happening. After Professor McGonagall had found them, the 3 of them were separated from their friends and traveled to the Slytherin dorms in the basement. There they found just about every other Slytherin student, along with Professor Snape, standing around and looking unsure. Their head of house hadn't told them why everyone had to stay in the dorms, only saying that something had happened and they were to remain there for their own safety. He did let them know that he'd inform them about what happened once it was safe to do so. Draco had tried to strongarm Professor Snape into telling him what was happening, but not even the snot-nosed brat of the Malfoy family could wiggle that bit of information out of their head of house. Professor Snape hadn't left the Slytherin common rooms. Daphne didn't know why, but he stayed in the common room with them, almost like he was attempting to prevent them from trying to sneak out, or maybe like he was trying to protect them. Even now she could see him standing in front of the entrance, arms crossed and face scowling. I wonder what crawled up his butt and died, Tracy murmured with a frown. Do you think there's been another death? Asked Blaise. Daphne frowned as she tore her gaze away from Professor Snape. That's possible. If we consider the way he's acting, there's a high chance that someone's been killed. I wonder if it was another student, Tracy contemplated. The very fact that they were sitting there, speculating about how someone may have been killed, struck Daphne as wrong. It wasn't just how they were discussing whether or not someone had been killed. It was how discussions like this had become commonplace. It was how they were at Hogwarts, supposedly one of the safest locations in the entire world. A noise alerted Daphne to something happening. It sounded like creaking. Seconds later, the crowd of students parted to reveal that Madame Pomfrey had entered the Slytherin common room. Severus, the woman began, please bring everyone to the Great Hall. Despite still wearing his patented sneer, Professor Snape nodded and turned to the students. You heard her. We're going to the Great Hall. Everyone form an orderly line and follow me. 7th years, make sure to keep all of the other students from getting out of order. Daphne fell in line with the others as they filed out of the common room. Tracy was in front of her and Blaise was behind her. They walked up several flights of stairs and down numerous hallways, eventually reaching the large double doors of the Great Hall. The Great Hall was already full of people. Because the Slytherin common room was further from the Great Hall than the Ravenclaws and Hufflepuffs, it made sense that all she saw was a sea of blue and yellow. As they walked further in, Daphne held onto Tracy and Blaise's hands, to keep from being separated as they searched for their friends. They found Susan, Hannah, Lisa, Luna, and Terry standing by Madame Amelia Bones. The sight of the DMLE's head startled Daphne, but she was a Greengrass. Her father's tutoring made it so that she would never display her surprise for longer than a second. Even now, those teachings, taught through many hours and a lot of pain, remained ingrained into her psyche. Madame Bones. She curtsied upon reaching the group. I'm not sure if I should say it's a pleasure to see you right now. A wry smile curled Madame Bones's lips. Considering the situation, you would be right. She turned to Susan. I'm going to speak with Severus Snape, so I'll leave you to your friends. Okay, Auntie. As Madame Bones walked off, Tracy wandered up to the redhead, her gaze inquiring. So, did your aunt tell you what's going on? Susan shook her head. She only said that something serious has happened. I'm beginning to wonder if another student really has been killed, Lisa said, worrying her lower lip. It might even be a teacher, Terry added. But if someone was killed here, then it means whoever did it is somewhere in Hogwarts, Hannah said. I know now that this school isn't the safest place, but could there really be a rampaging murderer on the loose? Our school doesn't have a very good track record, Tracy informed the bee-owned girl. I mean, just look at all the crap that's happened to us up to now. Daphne shook her head. Many of the situations that happened to us were circumstantial. Professor Quirrell was possessed by Bo, the Dark Lord, and Ginny Weasley was possessed by a diary of the Dark Lord. So, maybe one of the other students have been possessed by another item of the Dark Lord's, Tracy speculated. Unlikely, Daphne immediately rebutted her friend. Even though the headmaster was forced to resign, he would have at least made sure that dark items couldn't pass through the barrier surrounding Hogwarts. While it might not be foolproof, he'd have, at the very least, made it impossible for something dark enough to possess someone to be taken into Hogwarts. How are you so sure? Asked Lisa. I don't want to downhead. I mean, Dumbledore, but there's no evidence to support you. Do you really think Dumbledore would let the same thing happen twice? Asked Daphne in return. Look at what's happened so far this year. Until Dumbledore was forced to resign, all of the attacks happened outside of Hogwarts. Blaise blinked in realization. In other words, the attacks were committed outside of Hogwarts because the person who was doing the attacking couldn't attack while they were inside of the barrier. Exactly. Daphne nodded. If this person could attack while inside of Hogwarts, they would have done so from the beginning, especially if Harry was their target. Instead, they had to attack him in a roundabout manner, using his insatiable curiosity to lure him into a trap, and then using the guise of a terrorist attack to try and kill him at Hogsmeade when their first attempt failed. But what about when those armored suits attacked Harry? Asked Neville. If this person can't attack inside Hogwarts, then. I never said they couldn't, Daphne said. If someone wanted to attack another person, they can. There's no magic barrier that can stop attacks from happening. However, I'm pretty sure Dumbledore placed a charm on the barrier that would alert him to any dark magic being used. That's why this person was so careful until now. You mean until Madame Umbridge became the headmistress? Terry asked for clarification. Right, Daphne said. I doubt Madame Umbridge was ever set up to become the true headmistress of Hogwarts. She probably has no idea how to properly use the wards. She might not even be able to use them. Which means that someone could feasibly use dark magic now and no one would know about it, Luna said. When everyone turned to look at her, she gave them a curious tilt of her head. What is it? Is something wrong? It's nothing, Daphne mumbled before getting back on track. Luna is right. If Umbridge can't activate or even use the wards surrounding Hogwarts, then she probably can't sense when dark magic is used. So when Dumbledore was taken out of the picture, Tracy began. It left our school open to attacks from within, Blaise finished. This is bad, Terry said. Before anything else could be said, the doors to the Great Hall opened and Professor McGonagall rushed in. She stood at the entrance, but not for long. Her gaze turned to Madame Bones. With her lips set in a thin line, she made a beeline for the woman and began speaking frantically. Daphne wondered what they were talking about. She was getting a sinking feeling in her stomach. The feeling of her stomach dropping increased when Madame Bones returned to them. Could you all come with me please? She asked. No one said anything. Perhaps they, like Daphne, felt the sudden gravity to the situation. They followed Madame Bones without complaint. Professor McGonagall joined them, and as one, they went out of the Great Hall and into a small side door. After Madame Bones had cast several locking and silencing spells on the door, she turned around. Auntie? Susan questioned with a worried expression. I don't know how to tell you this gently, so I'm just going to come out and say it. Madame Bones took a deep breath, held it, and then released it. For whatever reason, that action made Daphne more worried than before. And then Madame Bones dropped the bombarda. Harry Potter has been kidnapped. Daphne felt like someone had stabbed her in the stomach. What? Susan asked, blinking rapidly as though trying to comprehend her aunt's words. Daphne couldn't even do that much. Madame Bones sighed. Professor McGonagall, if you'd please. Stepping forward, Professor McGonagall gave them all a sad look that verged on depressing. We have eyewitness accounts from Mr. Longbottom and Ms. Astoria Greengrass who say that Ginevra Weasley placed an object in Mr. Potter's hand and they both disappeared. An object disappeared. That didn't sound right. How could someone just disappear if an object was placed in their hands, unless a portkey, Lisa murmured before Daphne could say anything. That is what we believe, Madame Bones said. But that shouldn't be possible. Lisa burst. Hogwarts has several enchantments surrounding it, and one of them is the deactivation of all portkeys. No one can use a portkey unless the headmaster allows it. But Headmaster Dumbledore isn't here, Daphne murmured. Everyone turned to her. The headmaster isn't Dumbledore. It's Umbridge. I bet you anything that Umbridge doesn't know how to properly activate the enchantments surrounding Hogwarts. Actually, Senior Undersecretary Umbridge is dead, Madame Bones admitted. Several gasps escaped the students. Even Daphne beeped in a breath. We haven't told anyone, but since all of you are close to Harry, it's best that you know this now. We believe that Ginevra Weasley killed Umbridge in order to take down the enchantments. It was true that without a headmaster or headmistress, the enchantments surrounding Hogwarts automatically went down. Daphne's understanding was that the protection around the school was linked to each headmaster. If the headmaster wasn't there, the protections couldn't be activated. What I don't understand is why Ginny would do something like this, Terry said. It must be because of the Nargles, Luna told everyone. Come again? Asked a frowning Madame Bones. I noticed it when we came back from Christmas holidays, Luna said. There were a lot of Nargles surrounding Ginny. They were everywhere. I don't think I've ever seen so many Nargles in one place. Even Harry's scar doesn't have that many. Nargles, Madame Bones mouthed as though unsure of how to take this. Taking another look at Luna again, Daphne wondered if perhaps what Luna assumed were Nargles was actually magic. No one had ever taken the girl's words seriously, no one except for Harry. He'd indulged the girl a number of times. When she mentioned Nargles or some other make-believe creature, he would ask her about them. What are they? How do they move? What do they do? Daphne had thought he was just humoring the girl, but now. Could she be sensitive to magic? There were cases of children who were sensitive to the flow and ebb of magic. Oftentimes they could sense magic through one of the 5 senses. Daphne had once read that Merlin had been able to smell magic, and that his sensitivity was such that he could determine exactly what spell had been cast, who had cast it, and how long ago it had been cast based on the magic's distinct scent. Maybe, just maybe, Luna saw magic as strange creatures that her mind made up. Do you think there might still be something wrong with her? Susan asked. What do you mean? Asked Professor McGonagall with pursed lips. Last year, Ginny was possessed by a diary, Susan said. Harry told us about how the diary of Voldemort had taken control of her and killed Hermione. Maybe being possessed caused something inside of her to snap. But why would it not become apparent until now? Asked Blaise. If someone is going to break after something like that, it would have happened much sooner. People don't remain calm after stuff like this happens and then suddenly snap months down the road. My guess is it's because of the Nargles, Luna said. What do you mean? Asked Daphne. Tilting her head, Luna placed a finger to her lips as though she was thinking hard. Well, during the beginning of this year, there were only a few Nargles around Ginny. It wasn't until after Christmas break that she became infested with Nargles. While everyone else looked at her oddly, Daphne continued to question her. What did these Nargles look like? Was there anything unusual about them? Luna frowned, her brow furrowing. They did change color. Color. Daphne blinked. Yes. Nodding, Luna said, at the start of the year, all the Nargles around her were red, but after Christmas holidays, the Nargles became black. Black. If these Nargles were, in fact, magic, then perhaps black meant Luna was seeing dark magic. Daphne wasn't Harry. She had no idea if she was even close to the mark. However, barring anything else to go on, she chose to believe that Luna could see magic, and that something was wrong with Ginny Weasley's magic. That begged other questions, though. It couldn't have just been Ginny's magic that became corrupted. Could her mind have also degraded? It didn't sound right. If her mind had been destroyed, or if it became dark, it wouldn't have been such a slow process. Daphne shook her head. What happened to make Ginny do this way doesn't matter right now. Only one thing matters to me. What are we gonna do? Susan asked the question that Daphne wanted to ask. How are we going to find Harry? A rather prominent frown appeared on Madame Bones's face. You are not going to do anything. My orders and I will find Harry. Unacceptable, Daphne said, surprising everyone there, including herself. That didn't mean she was going to stop. There's no way I'm going to sit around, waiting on my thumbs while Harry is in danger. Daph is right, Tracy added. Harry's our friend, Terry agreed. Listen, Madame Bones started, I know that Harry is important to all of you, but it's not just that, Blaise said, shocking Daphne. It wasn't in his nature to interrupt others. You can't simply expect us to sit here and do nothing. Besides, can you really afford to not take all the help you can get? Professor McGonagall frowned at them. Now, you lot, I understand that you're worried, but you're still just kids. This is too much for you. With all due respect, Professor, we've already been through more than most kids our age, Lisa said. We've experienced more since coming to Hogwarts than even some adults. I don't think our age is a determining factor in whether or not we're qualified to help. While Professor McGonagall huffed and made a thin line with her lips, Madame Bones turned to Susan. I'm guessing you feel the same way. Of course I do, Susan said, her doe-like brown eyes blazing with a determination that was becoming more commonplace in her. The DMLE head sighed and gave her niece a weary smile. I have raised a very stubborn niece. I'm only as stubborn as the one who raised me, Susan returned. Very well, Madame Bones said. While I won't let any of you do something dangerous, I will allow you to help me locate Harry. Daphne looked at the others in relief. They must have been feeling it, too, because they all wore the same smile. Even if it was just finding Harry, or helping find out where he'd been taken, at least they were doing something. Are you sure about this, Amelia? Professor McGonagall asked. No. Madame Bones sighed. She looked at Daphne and the others, her smile both resigned and dry. But I'm not sure I could stop these kids even if I tried. Besides, they're right. I can't afford to close any avenues that might help us locate Harry. At those words, Professor McGonagall's shoulders slouched. I see. I can't stop you, since I do not have the authority. However, understand that I will hold you responsible should any harm befall my students. Don't worry, Madam Bones said. I'll make sure they never see danger. See to it that you do. While everyone began chattering about how they were going to save Harry, Daphne looked up at the wall, narrowing her eyes as though she could see through it. She was startled when a hand grabbed hers. Blinking several times, she turned her head to see who had grabbed her. It was Susan. Don't worry, the redhead said. We'll rescue Harry. Right. Daphne smiled and clutched Susan's hand. Of course we will. Harry woke up with a pained rasp. His chest felt like it had been repeatedly stabbed with a butcher knife. Every breath he took brought a sharp agony that made him want to curl into a ball. The jangling of chains made him flinch, even as the manacles attached to his wrists kept him from falling to the floor. The joints of his shoulders ached. A warm wetness trickled down his arms. A pair of manacles were digging into the skin of his wrists. He looked at his surroundings with bleary eyes, but no matter how much he looked, nothing seemed to have changed. His prison looked the same as he remembered the last time he woke up. Dirty white carpet, disgusting white walls, a cracked white ceiling, all of which was covered in crimson runes. This place had more in common with a barren mansion room than a prison, not like it mattered. Wherever this place was, it had clearly been designed to keep him from leaving. His eyes trailed across the runes covering the room. They were a meshwork of various runic languages. Just from the one side he had view of, Harry could see everything from Roman, Greek, Latin, Norse, and Egyptian runes. Someone had combined numerous languages into a single, massive, runic array. The person who had kidnapped him had unbelievable talent. More jingling made his eyes trail up to the manacles that wrapped around his wrists. Beyond the blood dripping from underneath the iron shackles, Harry could see the chain that was keeping him aloft. The chain was just long enough that his feet touched the ground if he stood on his tiptoes, but it was too short for him to stand properly. This left him in a precarious position. His left shoulder had also been dislocated from his last attempt to escape. His magic hadn't healed it. Harry didn't know where his wands were. Both his and his mother's wand had been gone the first time he'd woken up in this place. At that time, he had tried breaking out by smashing apart the manacles, but they were too strong. He'd also tried to pick the lock, but not only could he not conjure anything with which he could use as a lockpick, the manacles didn't have a keyhole. They were probably conjured creations. A loud creaking echoed from behind him. Harry would have turned his head, but he didn't even have the strength for that anymore. Footsteps played an ominous tune on the carpet. Thump thump, thump thump. They were precise, measured, and calm, the walk of someone who knew how to play with people's mind. Seconds later, a person walked in front of him. Red hair, green eyes, freckles. She was shorter than him, but the sense of presence, the dark aura surrounding her, was unlike anything he'd felt. You. Harry could barely speak. His throat was parched. Tom. Ginny chuckled. You've already figured out who I am. I'm not surprised. You really are intelligent. You actually remind me a lot of myself when I was your age. Ginny. Still here, I'm afraid, Tom admitted with a shrug. It's sad, but I can't get rid of her soul. Bodies are strange things. While the soul and the body are separated by the ethereal and physical planes, they are still connected by threads that cannot be undone without suffering consequences. If I killed off Ginny, this body would become useless. Tom cocked his, Ginny's, head to the side. Of course, there are ways of fixing that, but it takes a long time, and it's not worth the effort, especially when I don't have any plans for this body. Harry tried to follow Tom's line of thought, but the discomfort in his shoulders and pain in his arm distracted him. It made processing the words difficult. All he understood was that Tom had no designs on Ginny's body, and that Ginny was apparently still alive. You don't know how difficult it was for me to remain in this body, Tom continued. After you destroyed my diary, it took everything I had not to be destroyed along with it. Were it not for the fact that more than half of my soul had already been inside of her, I dare say I would have died. Not a pleasant prospect. No, not pleasant at all. As he spoke, Tom played with Ginny's wand. Harry blinked. His focus shifted to the wand, which was being spun through Tom's, or rather, Ginny's fingers. I had been weakened so much by what you did. My soul was waffling between slipping out of Ginny's body and destroying itself from the inside out. It took me months to stabilize my soul, and then it took me even longer to slowly subdue Ginny's mind without anyone realizing it. It didn't help that most of my magic had been consumed merely trying to keep myself inside of Ginny. Were you responsible for what happened this year? Harry asked, rasping. Tom smiled. It looked creepy on Ginny's face. Not everything. There were a good deal of fortunate coincidences that allowed me to accomplish what I have. I never would have been able to do anything so overt as kidnap you had Headmaster Dumbledore not been kicked out of Hogwarts. So not everything that had happened was caused by Tom Riddle. It sounded like all the events outside of Hogwarts, such as Peter Pettigrew's death and whatever Lucius Malfoy was doing, were separate issues. That beeped. Still, at least he now had a clearer idea of what was happening, though it wouldn't do him any good now. And why did you kidnap me? Asked Harry. Many reasons, Tom replied. Revenge, hatred, if I had to choose one, I'd say the biggest reason is because I want your body. It took Harry a second to realize what Tom meant. You want to use this body as your own. That's right. Lips peeling back to reveal shiny white teeth, Tom grinned with Ginny's face. Out of all the people I've met, you have the most ideal body. Your body is strong and your magic powerful. What's more, you're the boy who lived. You have everything that I want, so I'm going to take it from you. Tom paced in front of him. Harry could do nothing but track the man housing himself inside of Ginny with his eyes. But don't worry, I'll be sure to take great care of your body. Yes, with your body, I'll become the most powerful wizard in the entire world. I'll become even more feared than when I was Lord Voldemort. Tom stopped pacing, spun to face him, and pointed Ginny's wand at him. Sadly, you won't be around to witness my triumph. Crucio. From that moment on, Harry's life was nothing but excruciating pain. An announcement had been made immediately after Madame Bones had spoken with Daphne and the others. The headmistress and Dada professor were dead, and Harry Potter had been kidnapped. It was not shocking that panic had ensued. The students had never been so freaked out before. It showed on their faces, it was displayed in their actions. No one even wanted to leave their dorms anymore. The following days had been hard on Daphne. Aside from being forced to remain in the Slytherin den, Madame Bones had yet to contact them again, so she had been forced to rely on the Daily Prophet for information from outside. It seemed the world at large knew about what had happened to Senior Undersecretary Umbridge, Professor Antus, and Harry Potter. The Daily Prophet had spent its last 2 newspapers bashing the Ministry of Magic for its inability to properly deal with this situation. Perhaps in a not-so-unusual turn of events, it had also run roughshod over Minister Fudge for forcing Dumbledore to resign. There had even been several front-page articles calling for Dumbledore's return. Classes were no longer held in the classrooms. With no headmaster in place to activate the wards, Madame Bones had instituted a new policy stating that classrooms would be held in the House Common Rooms. Instead of students traveling to and from classrooms, teachers traveled to and from the common rooms. They taught classes as best they could. That said, it wasn't an efficient method. There was simply no way teachers could rush to each common room, teach for an hour, and then rush to the next common room without suffering some kind of consequence. Daphne had already noticed the effect this new policy had on her head of house. Professor Snape had not only been more irritable, refusing to speak with even his Slytherins, but he also had bags under his eyes and walked with a slump. Since the head of house was also required to be present until they needed to begin lessons in another common room, she would see him standing around the entrance, or sitting in front of the fireplace, his shoulders slouched and his eyes drooping. The other teachers were much the same. It was hard to believe that only 2 days had passed. To Daphne, it seemed like much longer. The days moved by at a snail's pace as she waited for word from Madame Bones that they had found Harry. Yet no word had come, and since she couldn't see Susan because they were in different houses, they couldn't communicate either. I wonder if that was the whole point. Sitting on the couch in front of the fireplace, Daphne entertained dark thoughts. She didn't want to assume it, but maybe all this, separating them into their houses, had been done to keep her and the others from trying to find Harry on their own. If so, It meant she had clearly underestimated Madame Bones's cunning. Man, I am so bored, Tracy muttered. Daphne scowled. She loved Tracy. Truly. But, sometimes, her friend had a really bad habit of annoying her. While she was worrying sick about Harry, Tracy seemed more concerned with how bored she was. Daphne knew that she was being hard on her friend. She didn't doubt that Tracy was also worried. Still, Tracy's carefree attitude in this situation bothered her. How could she be so calm when their friend had been kidnapped? There hasn't been much going on, has there? Blaze said, seemingly in agreement. What do you think the others are doing? Blaze shrugged. Probably the same thing we are. She, Tracy, and Blaze were sitting on the couch. A fire blazed in front of them. They weren't the only people present. Numerous students of every year were inside of the common room, clumped together in groups as they talked. Perhaps not surprisingly, Draco Malfoy was the loudest. She could hear him laughing at something with his friends. This beeps, Tracy said. Agreed, Blaze said. Unable to concentrate on anything, Daphne tried to listen in on Malfoy's conversation. She normally would never deign to taint her ears with his filthy voice. However, she didn't know what else to do, and perhaps she could learn something. There was a chance that the plan to kidnap Harry had been concocted by Malfoy's father. I bet you anything Pothead is dead already, Malfoy was saying. I certainly wouldn't mind if he was gone. Would save me a lot of trouble. Who do you think kidnapped him anyway? Asked Not. Don't know, Malfoy admitted. It could have been one of the Dark Lord's former Death Eaters. If it was, it'd certainly serve him right. That fool's been trying to butt heads with Father ever since he showed his stupid scar-covered face. Daphne gritted her teeth as she listened to Malfoy. The longer he spoke, the more she wanted to show him what kind of spells her father had taught her. It's too bad the Dark Lord isn't here to see this, Pansy Parkinson said, her pug-like nose wrinkling as she laughed. Isn't it? I bet he'd get a hoot out of knowing that Pothead has been kidnapped. He might even be willing to give the person who did it a reward for their service. As Malfoy and his thugs laughed, Daphne stood up. Blaze and Tracy looked at her, then at each other, and then they also stood up. They followed her as she wandered over to the stairs. Her plan was to leave the room so she wouldn't have to listen to Malfoy's drivel. Where are you going, Greengrass? Malfoy called out, stopping her plan in its tracks. I thought that would be obvious, Malfoy, Daphne said in a cold voice as she turned her head. She gave the Malfoy heir a baleful stare. I've no intention to listen to you spew your arrogant shite all over the floor. Malfoy scowled, but the expression soon turned into a grin. I see. You're upset that your friend has been kidnapped. I don't see why. He was a stain on your family, always hanging around. Now that Pothead is gone, the Greengrasses can become a proper pureblood family again. The only improper pureblood family are yours and those like yours, Blaze said. I wasn't talking to you, Twink, Malfoy snapped. I was speaking to Daphne. It wouldn't matter if you were talking to me or not, Blaze said, ignoring the insult with ease. Her answer would have been the same as mine. Your family and those like it are the only traitors here. That's right, Tracy added, so shut the frack up, Blondie. I see you're as uncultured as ever, Malfoy sniffed. Draco, Pansy crooned. Daphne cringed at her voice. I'm tired of dealing with these slags. Let's just ignore them. Tracy took a step forward. Oh, you did not just call me and my friends slags. Pansy wrinkled her pug-like nose. Of course I did. That's what you are. You're all Harry's slags. Then I guess that would make you Malfoy's slag, Blaze said. How much does he pay you anyway? Can other people hire you? Pansy's face turned purple. The way her skin wrinkled as though she was a rotten fruit amused Daphne. How dare you? She hissed. I'll have you know that Draco and I are betrothed. It's only natural for two such people to be close, unlike you and yours. I'd recommend you tossers watch what you say, Malfoy added. As if to emphasize his point, Crabbe and Goyle stepped forward and cracked their knuckles. Daphne slowly palmed her wand, sweat trickling down her scalp. If a fight broke out, she and her friends would surely win. They'd been training with Harry for about 2 years now. She was already plotting out how they'd be victorious. She'd take down Malfoy first. Without their head, the body would fall shortly after. Blaise and Tracy could easily dispose of Crabbe and Goyle before they got too close, and Pansy wouldn't be much of a problem. The only two issues that she could see were Theodore Nott and Charlene Bishwick. The one who worried Daphne the most was Charlene. Not much was known about her. She was a year ahead of them, and all of her grades were supposedly mid-ranked. She was stuck solidly in the middle. Going by her grades, there was nothing to worry about, but Daphne felt uneasy around her. The biggest issue she had was on how little knowledge was available about the girl. Charlene was practically a ghost. Outside of her grades, nothing was known about her, not her family, not her history. It was as if she'd just appeared on day. There was also, "She's smiling at me." Charlene's smile was calm, collected. It was the kind of smile that someone gave to people when they didn't have a single care. However, beneath that smile, Daphne couldn't help but feel like there was something lurking there, a hidden horror, an unknown monster. She didn't want to admit it, but that smile scared her. It scared her almost as much as her father's. Before the situation could degrade any further, Professor Snape wandered into the common room. He took one look at the gathered crowd. Then he sneered. "What are all of you doing?" he asked, though he didn't give anyone time to respond. "We've been summoned to the Great Hall for breakfast. There's going to be an important announcement, so I suggest you all follow me." Breakfast, lunch, and dinner were the only times when all four houses gathered. They were led there by their head of houses. This was the only time that Daphne could speak with the others, not that they'd been able to take advantage of this fact. What they wanted to talk about was too sensitive to risk others overhearing it, and none of them had Harry's knack for creating silencing barriers. This meant they could only speak in code. Story. Daphne smiled as she greeted her little sister. "How is everything with the Gryffindors?" They had chosen to sit at the Ravenclaw table that day. She, Astoria, Luna, Neville, and Terry sat on one side. Blaise, Hannah, Lisa, Tracy, and Susan sat on the other. "Well, everyone seems to be pretty frightened," Astoria said as she spooned some oatmeal onto her plate. "Not that I blame them, mind. I mean, Harry Potter did get kidnapped right in front of most of them. I feel sorriest for the Weasley twins. They're still in shock." Astoria spent almost as much time with Fred and George Weasley as she did Luna. Daphne wasn't sure how she felt about that, but she supposed so long as she didn't get into trouble, it would be okay. Besides, it made her sister happy. "Has anyone else been acting unusual?" Daphne asked. Astoria shook her head. "Not that I've seen." Daphne nodded and looked at Neville, who shook his head. "I haven't noticed anything either." She sighed. "Same as yesterday, then. I actually have some news that might cheer you up," Susan spoke up. "Auntie sent me a letter yesterday saying that she has some good news. She wouldn't tell me what, but her letter said there was going to be an announcement this morning." "An announcement?" Lisa blinked. "She didn't say what." Susan shook her head. "Well, that beeps." Tracy sighed. "It means we have to learn what's going on beside everyone else. If it was something that couldn't wait, I'm sure Madam Bones would have told us," Terry said. "Don't be so impatient." "I'm not impatient," Tracy barked. "I just want to know before everyone else." "That's the same thing as being impatient, idiot." "Oh, shut up." Daphne tuned out Terry and Tracy as they argued. She tried to think about what announcement Madam Bones would be making, but she couldn't think of what might be important enough to tell everybody about. It could be anything. Even so, she didn't think it was about Harry. She was sure that Madam Bones would have told them before everyone else, so whatever the DMLE head had to say didn't mean much to her. As if contradicting her thoughts, the door opened and in walked two people. One of them was Madam Bones. The other was Merlin's scraggly scrotum. Tracy exclaimed. "It's Dumbledore." Daphne couldn't even reprimand Tracy for her language. She was shocked as well. It was Dumbledore. At the same time. "What is he wearing?" Neville asked the question that everyone else wanted to know. Dumbledore was wearing the most unusual outfit she had ever seen. White swim trunks went above his knees, and he wore a button-up t-shirt with motifs of palm trees and coconuts. He also a pair of sunglasses covering his eyes. His beard had been braided. Sitting atop his head was a large straw hat. He also had a martini in his hand. Did I just step into an alternate reality? Asked Terry. I wouldn't be surprised if that's what happened, Hannah murmured. Most everyone was silent as Dumbledore walked up to the front next to an exhausted Madam Bones. He reached the podium, turned around, and spoke in a voice that reached all corners of the room. Students of Hogwarts, forgive me for not being dressed for the occasion. I had been enjoying a vacation in Guam. Vacation in Guam. Daphne felt her hand twitch. Was this some kind of joke? Well, that explains why it took several days to get him back, Tracy said at last. Terry nodded. Indeed. They're just accepting it. I've heard about what happened, Dumbledore continued. I do not believe there is any need to reiterate this point. Let me assure you all that I will do everything in my power to ensure that this school no longer has to deal with the hardships it's had. I will be working with the Aurors to not only increase the security surrounding Hogwarts, but I'll also do everything within my power to locate Harry Potter. Despite his ridiculous clothing, Daphne couldn't help but feel relieved by Dumbledore's words. She also hoped this would mean that they, Dumbledore and Madam Bones, would speak with her and her friends. She wanted to help find Harry, and she was sure that her friends felt the same way. The wards have been restored, Dumbledore kept talking. So all of you will be attending your classes as normal. If you see anything suspicious, do not hesitate to report it to either a professor or one of the portraits. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need change back into my robes. Please continue eating. Dumbledore. No. Headmaster Dumbledore left after that, leaving the students to their conversation, which was now about the headmaster. Daphne listened to them for a moment. She stopped, however, because she soon became slightly disgusted about how everyone was now talking about how Dumbledore would surely help them. These people had been scorning him before, but now they were praising him. It's just like Harry said. Most of these people are nothing more than sheep. Did anyone else find that weird? Asked Tracy. Everyone shook their head. Okay. Glad it's not just me. Breakfast continued, except now everyone was talking about the headmaster's return. Daphne focused on her meal. While she was curious about Headmaster Dumbledore coming back and what that could potentially mean for her, she didn't have any information to go off of yet, so she wasn't about to start speculating. When breakfast was nearing its end, Madam Bones came up to their group and said, Susan, I'd like you and your friends to come with me to the headmaster's office, please. Susan looked up. Then she looked at everyone else. Daphne also studied her friends, who were all wearing similar expressions. As a group, everyone nodded. Susan turned back to her aunt. Okay. Great. Madam Bones said. Please follow me. Since everyone was already done eating, they stood up and followed Madam Bones out of the Great Hall. As they walked, the group kept close together and spoke. What do you think this is about? Asked Hannah. If I had to guess, I would say it's about Harry, Blaise said. Neville nodded. I can't see any other reason they'd ask all of us to the headmaster's office. Me neither, Tracy added. Daphne didn't speak. They arrived at the headmaster's office soon, and all of them had the pleasure of watching Madam Bones prepare to knock on the door. Come in, Amelia, only to be interrupted. Harry told me about this, Tracy said with a snicker. They filed into the room, which shut behind them. Daphne looked around. The headmaster's office had been restored to its former glory. She'd only been in this place once when Madame Umbridge had been headmistress. She didn't think she'd ever be so glad to see the room return to its original quirkiness. Headmaster Dumbledore was already sitting behind his desk, and he was no longer wearing that gaudy outfit. Dressed back in his wizarding robes, he looked more like a headmaster. Daphne was glad. His previous outfit had been, well, to call it shocking may have been understating the matter. There was someone else beside him. She was a mousy woman with scraggly hair and large glasses that reminded Daphne of enormous pucks. Her wardrobe, an odd mixture of wizarding robes that appeared to have been made from patches and a quilted scarf, made her look even more like an oddball. Welcome, everyone, Headmaster Dumbledore said. I'm glad to see you could all make it. Now, as we are pressed for time, please allow me to introduce Professor Trelawney. I'm sure some of you have her as your teacher. She's going to be helping us locate Harry. She is? Tracy asked, her face wrinkling with skepticism. No offense, headmaster, but have you gone? Kya. Tracy shrieked and spun around, holding a hand to her backside. All right. Which one of you pinched my butt? That would be me. Astoria raised her hand. Why would you do that? Tracy asked, aghast. Astoria shrugged. Because if I hadn't, Daphne and Susan would have elbowed you. I figured this was the lesser of two evils. Tracy grimaced, but she didn't say anything, probably because she realized that Astoria was right. I'd like to ask the question that I'm sure Tracy was going to ask, Neville said. How is she going to help us find Harry? Professor Trelawney sniffed at them. My dear children, I'll have you know that I am a true seer. My talents are born from a long and noble ancestry. In fact, many in my family were seers, and I am the first one to come in 3 generations. I know of a spell that we can use to divine Harry's location, Professor Dumbledore said. Even if he is located behind a Fidelius charm, the spell is so powerful that it cannot be blocked. Sadly, we can only use this spell once every 2 years, due to how dangerous it can be. If you've asked for us, I assume that means you have some need for our aid. Daphne said. Headmaster Dumbledore nodded. Very astute, Ms. Greengrass. Yes, I need 7 of you to help me with this spell. You see, this spell is unique in that, in order for it to work, it requires exactly 7 people who are close to Harry. Including Daphne, Harry Potter had exactly 10 friends that he could rely on. 3 of them would be excluded. Daphne should definitely be one of them, Tracy said. Everyone knows that she loves Harry. Ouch. Please refrain from speaking, Daphne said as she lowered her hand, which she had used to karate chop Tracy's head. I'd also like to take part in this, Susan said. That's 2. We need 5 more, Dumbledore said. I'll do it. Neville stepped forward. Blaise also took a step forward. So will I. I'd like to help out, if I can, Lisa said, stepping up with the others. Luna looked at everyone, and then took her own step forward. I think you all could use my experience with Nargles to help find Harry. HMPH. If you guys are doing this, I'm not gonna stand back and do nothing, Tracy said, puffing up her chest. Terry sighed. I'll make sure Tracy doesn't muck up the spell. What's that supposed to mean? Excellent. Headmaster Dumbledore clapped his hands. We have 7 people who can help me perform the spell. It's good to see that Harry has such great friends. Now, the spell takes a good deal of time to prepare, so we'll meet on the 7th day of this month, at 1300 hours, on the night of the new moon. Your head of houses will let you know when the spell is ready. Daphne frowned. It was April 2nd, which meant they would have to wait 5 days for the spell to be ready. She didn't want to wait that long, but it didn't look like they had a choice. This spell must have been a complex one. Few spells required so many magical numbers and ritualistic symbols to cast. I hate waiting, she lamented to herself. Harry Potter stared at nothing. His body had long since lost its strength. Hanging limply within the shackles that bound him, he could no longer feel the blood dripping down his arms, or the liquid staining his robes. All he could do was dangle there like a piece of meat being displayed in front of a butcher store. Time had lost its meaning. He no longer knew how much of it had passed. Hours, days, weeks, years. He couldn't tell anymore. The numerous torture sessions he'd undergone had left him incapable of thinking about anything outside of survival. His internal clock had been busted after spending who knew how many hours under Voldemort's Crucio. The first few sessions had been the worst. Voldemort would come in and hit him with a Crucio spell until he passed out, his mind overloaded with agony. Harry eventually became accustomed to the pain. However, once that happened, Voldemort decided to up the ante. He'd then begun attacking Harry with Legillamancy and Crucio. Harry quickly learned that Voldemort was a master Legilimens. His attacks could tough and powerful, but they could also subtle and cunning, strong yet flexible. Sometimes the mind attacks were like a sledgehammer being slammed against his mind. Other times it was like a rapier, slowly cutting away at his sanity piece by piece. The attacks were so varied that Harry never knew what kind of attack was coming his way until after it already happened. He'd done his best to defend himself, of course, but Harry had soon realized that his skills, enviable though they may have been, were nothing compared to Voldemort's. Again and again Voldemort would beep his mind. The Dark Lord would extract his memories and torture him by replacing those memories with nightmares. What made it worse was that Voldemort had discovered Harry's two greatest secrets: his eidetic memory, and his friendship with Lisa. The only silver lining was that he had yet to extract Lisa's location from him. Harry had zealously protected that information. It didn't matter if Voldemort discovered everything else. He would not let this man have that. You really are quite resilient, Voldemort complimented Harry after another torture session. Everyone else I've done this to broke within the first day, but you've lasted for 4. That mind of yours really is something. Harry said nothing. He probably could have made a retort, if he wanted to, but that would have taken energy. It was better to save his energy. He would need it if he wanted to escape from this place. Nothing to say. That's too bad, Voldemort said in Ginny's voice. And here I was hoping we could have a pleasant conversation. You're quite rude, you know. He knew what Voldemort was trying to do. By talking while Harry was weak, he was hoping to make Harry reply as a means of testing how far along Harry's mind had broken. If Harry replied, it meant he was weakening because he didn't have the mental strength to keep his mouth shut. And so Harry said nothing. Voldemort sighed. I see you are still being stubborn. Very well. Rolling Ginny's wand between his fingers, Voldemort grinned. Shall we begin again? As Voldemort cast a Crucio while simultaneously attacking his mind with Legilimency, Harry Potter's world became nothing but an endless cycle of pain. His screams of agony echoed within the small room. 5 days felt more like 5 years to Daphne. During that time, she had been unable to concentrate on anything, not her school work, not her friends, she barely even slept or ate. Almost all of her thoughts were consumed with worry for Harry. Her friends were in the same boat. Most of them didn't do anything. When they should have been studying, instead they were idling around, doing nothing. When they should have been listening to their teachers, they were doing anything but. It had become so bad that even Professor Snape had asked her what was wrong. Susan had also been hit particularly hard, but that might have been due to the personal conflict she was going to. Daphne wanted Susan to become one of Harry's wives. She had spoken with the girl numerous times before, and, for the past 1.5 years, Susan had been teetering between what she wanted out of her relationship with Harry. That compiled with his kidnapping had probably left her more haggard than their other friends. Fortunately, 5 days did eventually pass. Even so, that day was quite possibly the worst out of all them. She and her friends were informed after breakfast that they would be performing the ritual. Professor McGonagall had given them a slip of parchment, which told them to meet in the central tour at midnight. The passcode to get through the door was air. Sitting in Charm's class, Daphne could do nothing but tap her foot against the floor and wonder how much longer she'd have to wait. They were supposed to be doing revisions on the disarming charm. However, Daphne couldn't even think straight, much less work on revisions. Hey, Daph. Tracy leaned over to whisper in her ear. I know you're worried about Harry, but you really should focus. I don't want to hear that from you, Daphne snapped before grimacing. Sorry. I don't mean to be rude. You're just worried about Harry, Tracy finished. I know. Everyone knows. You really love him, don't you? Daphne's right ring finger twitched. Yes, I do. He means a lot to me. Tracy nodded. He means a lot to everyone, but I can tell that he holds a special place in your heart. I'm kinda surprised. Never thought I'd see the day you would fawn over a boy. I'm not fawning over anyone. Daphne scowled, and then she sighed. It's not fawning. Harry has done a lot for me these past 3 years. It's thanks to him that Astoria and I are as happy as we are now. Even if I hadn't fallen in love with him, I'd want to repay him for everything he's done to help us. Does Harry know you love him? Tracy asked. He definitely knows I like him, Daphne replied neutrally. He also knows that I would like him to consider marrying me in the future, but I don't know if he realizes that I love him. I'm sure part of him just thinks I want to marry him so Astoria and I can get out from under our father's thumb. Harry was a boy who believed in practicality and acting in a manner that was based on logic instead of emotion. Whether it was befriending powerful pureblood families or creating places like the All-House Common Room, everything Harry had done served his own purpose in some ways. Always practical. Always logical. Daphne was actually surprised that he had been placed in Gryffindor. His ambitions and actions were clearly those of a Slytherin. Since Harry believed in being practical, some part of him likely also believed that others acted in the same manner, especially those who were placed in Slytherin. There was no doubt that he thought Daphne wanted to marry him for the sake of hers and her sister's safety. He would not be incorrect in thinking that way either. At the same time, she wasn't just doing this for that reason. She wanted to get away from her father, true, but she also wanted to be with Harry. If she had to become someone's mistress, then she wanted it to be with someone she loved. Yeah, Tracy agreed. Harry's not really the kind of guy who thinks about romance and stuff, huh? A marriage to him would probably mean something like a political alliance between families or whatever. Most likely. Daphne smiled. He's also a boy. You know that girls mature faster than boys. Tracy nodded. True that. I'm right here, you know, Blaise said with a small sigh. Neither of them paid attention to him, though. Classes eventually came to an end. Daphne and the others went to their common rooms, but that did not bring an end to her anxiety. Indeed, the closer the chosen time came, the faster her heart seemed to beat. The door to her dorm suddenly opened and Professor Snape walked in. Since he was the head of house, it made sense that he could enter the girls' dorm. He looked at her and Tracy. Both of them were sitting on her bed. Then he gestured to them. Follow me, he said. She and Tracy looked at each other before standing up, slipping on their shoes, and following Professor Snape out of the girls' dorm. Blaise was waiting outside of the dorm entrance. He nodded at them as they walked into the common room, and then filed in line. Professor Snape exited the common room and led them through Hogwarts. Daphne didn't even bother memorizing the route they had taken, not that she could. She followed Professor Snape as Tracy spoke to Blaise. What kind of spell do you think they're going to cast? She asked. Who knows? It'll probably be some kind of ritual magic. That's the only reason they would require so much preparation time. I guess. Hey, do you know any rituals? I know of rituals, but I can say that I know any. Ritual magic was an offshoot branch of ancient runes. It used a combination of arithmancy, runes, and astronomy to accomplish. Certain rituals could only be performed during certain times of the day, or under specific seasons when certain star formations were visible. They required specific arithmetic numbers that would enhance the runic array's power. Daphne didn't know much about rituals, but she knew that the one they were going to perform must be strong. Not only was it being done during a new moon, it also required 7 people to perform it. The ritual was being performed in the central tower, the tallest of the towers. Daphne and Blaise hiked up the tower in silence. Tracy groaned the longer they climbed. How many freaking stairs does this thing have? She griped. Quiet, Ms. Davis, Professor Snape said. Tracy fell silent. The tallest tower was actually the astronomy tower. The top was normally where Professor Sinistra slept. However, at that moment, all of her personal effects had been removed. The room, barren of any sort of decoration or furniture, now played host to a massive runic array the likes of which Daphne had never seen. It was painted along the walls, floor, and ceiling, lines and symbols that she knew not. They swirled around the room like a mosaic. Headmaster Dumbledore was already there. He looked a bit pale as the moonlight played off his face. Standing beside him were Neville, Astoria, Lisa, Terry, Hannah, Susan, and Luna, along with their head of houses. Professor Trelawney was also present. She stood away from the others, looking as though she was preparing herself for an arduous task. Daphne had the feeling she was trying to look important. Ah, Headmaster Dumbledore's eyes lit up when they arrived. It is good that you are here. We must begin the final preparation for the ritual immediately. As Daphne, Tracy, and Blaise walked over to their friends, Professor McGonagall frowned at the headmaster. Perhaps it's time you tell us how this ritual is going to work. Of course, Dumbledore replied easily. This is a magic-based divination ritual. The 7 students who will take part are there to act as anchors to Mr. Potter. Their love, respect, and friendship with Harry will be like threads that will allow Professor Trelawney to divine Mr. Potter's location. Ah, Now Daphne understood why they needed 7 to perform the ritual. 7 was one of the most powerful magical numbers. By having 7 of Harry's friends there to perform it, the power of the threads that tied them to Harry would be that much stronger. Furthermore, new moons were seen as a symbolic point of attention and a symbol for new beginnings. New moons also represent the beginning of a new cycle. Magically speaking, it was the time when people rested to increase their power, meaning that in a ritual, the new moon was magically more powerful than a full moon. Dumbledore continued his explanation. While Harry's friends act as the threads that tie the ritual to him, you four, along with myself, shall provide the power necessary to activate the ritual. Meanwhile, Trelawney will become the focal point for the ritual. That means there will be 13 people in total. Like 7, 13 was a powerful number in magic-based rituals and arithmancy. This ritual would eventually combine two magically powerful numbers together. Actually, if Daphne thought about it further, the other people taking part made 6. Headmaster Dumbledore and Professors Flitwick, McGonagall, Sprout, Snape, and Trelawney. 6 was divisible by 3, which meant this ritual used the 3 most powerful numbers in magic 4 times. This spell must take a frightening amount of power. Okay. Headmaster Dumbledore clapped his hands. Everyone, please get into position. Severus, Minerva, Sprout, Flitwick, please stand in the circles that represent power. Trelawney, stand in the middle. Everyone else, find a circle and stand in it, please. All of the professors moved into a specific circle with a runic symbol that Daphne didn't recognize. That left 7 empty circles, which she and her friends stepped into. Professor Trelawney moved into the middle and began muttering. Ah, yes, I can feel it. Tonight I shall be forced to reveal my true power. Many moons have passed since I have needed to bring out my full power. The time is nigh. We'll unlock the mysteries of the future. Professor McGonagall pinched the bridge of her nose as though disgusted by Professor Trelawney's act. Meanwhile, Headmaster Dumbledore smiled as he began to explain the next step. All right. While the professors and I are channeling magic into the ritual, I want you 7 to close your eyes and think of Mr. Potter. Do not think of anything else. Visualize Mr. Potter in your mind. Keep that image locked in place. This is important. If you're not thinking solely of Harry, the ritual won't work. Terry and Trace gulped, but they were the only ones who appeared nervous. Neville's face had hardened and become stone. Blaise simply took several calming breaths, and Luna was staring at the sky with her head tilted. Daphne didn't even want to know what was going on through that girl's mind. What if the ritual doesn't work? The thought entered her mind before she could stop it. As much as she hated entertaining the idea, she knew that with so many people involved, there was a high chance of failure. Rituals were more difficult when more people were added. This was because they required people's minds to be in sync, but that was hard when there were so many people with different thoughts and mindsets. What if I fail? Her greatest fear was not just the ritual not working, but that she would somehow cause it to mess up. Harry meant a lot to her. In fact, the only person more important to her than Harry was Astoria. She didn't think she could bear the thought of being why this ritual failed to work. Okay, everyone, Headmaster Dumbledore said, snapping Daphne out of her anxiety. We're now beginning the ritual. Daphne shunted aside her fears, put away her doubts, and locked her worries in the furthest recesses of her mind. There was no time for that. She needed to focus. Closing her eyes and clasping her hands together, Daphne emptied her mind. When it was suitably void, she imagined Harry, pictured his vivid green eyes and messy black hair, envisioned the scar on his forehead. She produced images of him during their times together, recalling all the little quirks that she remembered. How ridiculous he looked when he tried to wear a business suit, how he would sometimes roll his wand between his fingers when he was thinking, the way his brows would furrow, or how his eyes would light up while explaining magic to them. Daphne filled her mind with images of him, so many that she thought her heart would burst. And that was when something happened. It felt like something was tugging her mind. The images she conjured blurred and moved away from her, as though they were being pulled out of her head. Daphne opened her eyes, not sure what she would find. The entire room was lit in a blood-red glow. The runic array had magic visibly flowing through it, reminding her of a stream. All of the energy was flowing from the circles they stood in, following the lines, lighting up the rune symbols, and then traveling toward Professor Trelawney. Professor Trelawney, whose eyes no longer showed her pupils. They were pure white, glowing with magic as though her eyes had become Lumos spells. The divination professor no longer looked like a joke. Her mouth opened, and a voice that sounded like Professor Trelawney but not at the same time spoke. The one with the power to defeat the Dark Lord shall be found within the ancestral home of that who can only be defeated by him. There, he shall be rescued by the ones who love him most. The one with the power to defeat the Dark Lord shall be found within the Dark Lord's ancestral home. After she finished speaking, the glowing runes died out, and Professor Trelawney slumped to the ground like a marionette without strings. The other professors all fell to their knees. They heaved for breath as though exhausted. Even Headmaster Dumbledore was slumped over like he'd run 200 kilometers without rest. So, does anyone have any idea what Professor Trelawney meant? Asked Tracy. She said that the one with the power to defeat the Dark Lord will be found in the Dark Lord's ancestral home, Terry said. She was clearly talking about Harry. Thank you for that, Boot, but that's not what I meant, Tracy snapped. The ancestral home is probably talking about the Dark Lord's birthplace, Lisa said. Or perhaps the birthplace of his family. Very astute, Ms. Turpin, Headmaster Dumbledore said. This divination was indeed talking about the birthplace of the Dark Lord's family. Do you know where that is, Headmaster? Asked Neville. I know of at least 2 potential places, the Headmaster admitted. One of them I cannot remember the exact location of, though I know what town it is in. It's likely under Fidelius. I doubt we'll find Mr. Potter in that one. Where's the other one? Asked Daphne. Headmaster Dumbledore gave Daphne a grim smile. It is the place where Salazar Slytherin was born, and it is there that I believe we will find Mr. Potter. Absolutely not. Madame Amelia Bones all but shouted. Daphne, Susan, Blaise, Neville, Hannah, Lisa, Tracy, Terry, Luna, and Astoria were standing in the headmaster's office. They were not taking place in the heated discussion, however. The ones arguing currently were Madame Bones and Headmaster Dumbledore, though it looked like the heads of houses were on Madame Bones's side. If nothing else, they were standing behind her and not the headmaster. Amelia. Dumbledore tried. Do not. Amelia. Me, headmaster, Madame Bones snapped. You are asking me to take a bunch of school children with me on a dangerous rescue mission. That's the height of lunacy. I'll not be party to it. I do not want them to be placed in such danger any more than you do, Headmaster Dumbledore replied, his voice mild. However, Professor Trelawney's words were, he shall be rescued by the ones who love him most. This means they are the key to rescuing Mr. Potter. If they do not take part in this mission, then the chances of your success drop to about 0. You're saying we'll fail. Madame Bones curled her lips in distaste. You already know that I do not put any stock in prophecies and such, Dumbledore. The headmaster spread his arms. And yet, you are going to rescue Mr. Potter based on the information given in one of those divinations. Divining someone's location is one thing. Telling us that we can only succeed if a group of children come with us is another. There were 2 points of contention to this back and forth. Madame Bones had objected to Daphne and the others going with them from the moment Headmaster Dumbledore had suggested it. Her stance was that she and the others were too young to take part in a mission like this, and it was true that they lacked the experience needed. The headmaster had refuted her. He had stated that without them, the entire mission was doomed to failure because Professor Trelawney's divination said so. While the professors were siding with Madame Bones, Daphne knew who she was going to side with. She took a step forward. I want to go, Susan said before Daphne could even open her mouth. Susan. Madame Bones looked at her with wide eyes. I want to rescue Harry, Susan said. I know it's dangerous. I do get that. However, if our presence means you can rescue Harry, then I believe it's a small price to pay. It's too dangerous. I can't. If it's so dangerous, then have a stay in the back, Daphne said, stepping forward to stand beside Susan. Surround us with Aurors so we're constantly protected. The divination never said that we had to be involved in the operation itself. Divinations like that are always up to interpretation. It only said that we need to be there to rescue him. It never said anything about other people. If you put together a large protection detail, then we can rescue Harry while still being safe. Madam Bones's lips became a thin line. Daphne hoped that meant she was coming around to the idea. I also want to rescue Harry, Neville said. The Potters and Longbottoms have been allies for over a century. What's more, Harry is my friend. I'd be doing a disservice to both if I didn't help rescue him. I'm going as well, Blaise added as he stepped forward. I might not be able to do much, but I think my presence will be important. One by the one, all of Harry's friends stepped forward. Tracy, Terry, Lisa, Luna, Hannah, even Astoria voiced their assent. They wanted to rescue Harry. Headmaster Dumbledore smiled. Amelia, if you feel like them going is too dangerous, then I have a compromise for you. With a weary sigh as though their argument exhausted her, she turned to the headmaster. And what is that? I will go with you to rescue Harry and will personally protect these children. Madam Bones covered her face with her hands. A sigh escaped her lips, along with a groan of what Daphne could only guess was defeat. They didn't really have time to argue. Amelia must have understood that. Fine, she said, giving in. However, if something happens to them, I will personally hold you responsible. Headmaster Dumbledore replied with a mild smile. If something happens to them, I will hold myself responsible. Now, let's flow Sirius Black. He'll also want to be involved in this, since it's his godson we're rescuing. Sirius Black had not been pleased to learn that his godson had been kidnapped. Daphne had listened to the flow call as Sirius spewed insults and curses like they were going out of style. She then witnessed Sirius storm in through the fireplace, grab Headmaster Dumbledore by the beard, and yell in his face. Remus had stood behind the man, calmer than Sirius but still reminiscent of a brewing storm. His anger had been almost palpable. To his credit, Headmaster Dumbledore did not retaliate. He waited until Sirius had run out of energy, and then placed a hand on the younger man's shoulder before apologizing. Sirius had accepted it. He probably knew that the headmaster wasn't at fault, since Headmaster Dumbledore had been kicked out of Hogwarts before Harry got kidnapped. What happened afterward was a whirlwind. Daphne and her friends were escorted out of Hogwarts alongside Sirius Black, Madam Bones, and Headmaster Dumbledore. They were then forced to wait in a sitting room within the Ministry of Magic for several hours. It was a small room, with little in the way of color and only 10 seats lined across the wall. While Daphne, Astoria, and Susan had chosen to sit in chair, Dumbledore and Sirius were also in a chair, the others stood or paced along the room. Daphne was forced to listen as Tracy complained. How long are we going to sit around here? The girl asked. Amelia is probably gathering an Auror task force, Headmaster Dumbledore told her, his smile very much like that of a grandfather's. Please be patient. I hate being patient. Tracy pouted. Oh, believe me, we know that, Trace, Daphne said. Tracy's pout deepened. Do you think Harry's doing all right? Asked Hannah. I mean, it's been several days since he was kidnapped. What if they already? Don't even think that way, Daphne snapped. There's no way Harry's dead. He can't be. Hannah looked away. Sorry. I mean I didn't want to. No. Daphne sighed as she slumped in her chair. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to get angry. Don't worry about it. You're just worried about Harry. I understand. Daphne didn't say anything, for she didn't think her emotions would let her talk without snapping again, but she offered Hannah a grateful smile. Speaking of being worried, Sirius began, what are you kids doing here? Everyone gave Sirius a deadpan stare, though only Daphne responded. We've been with you this whole time and you're just now realizing we're here. While Sirius had the decency to look abashed, Headmaster Dumbledore smiled. Perhaps it was because of her sarcasm, or maybe it was thanks to Tracy's guffaws, but the head of House Black said nothing after that. He mumbled something that none of them could hear and went quiet. Remus spoke up soon after. To answer your question, Ms. Abbott, I do not think Harry is in danger of dying. If whoever kidnapped him wanted him dead, they would have already killed him. They did try to kill him several times, Blaise pointed out. Did they? Remus asked back. I don't know about you, but I think the fact that Harry survived means their true intent wasn't to kill him off. When you think about it, their indirect manner of attacking seems more like it was designed to test Harry. You think they were testing him? Lisa asked. Shrugging, Remus offered his opinion. It's certainly possible. The fact that they managed to kidnap Harry so easily suggests they could have done it at any time. That means they had another reason for the attacks. I can only assume they were testing his abilities for some reason. Perhaps they wanted to see how much of a fight he'd put up if they kidnapped him, or maybe there's some other reason we're not aware of. Before anybody else could speak, the door opened and Madame Bones walked in. Her outfit had changed. She was no longer wearing her sharp DMLE head robes. She had traded them for a set of darker robes. Underneath the robes, Daphne saw a glimmer of body armor. The reason Harry was kidnapped doesn't matter right now, Madame Bones said, speaking to Remus. If you'll all follow me. I've already debriefed my men on how we're going to be working. The mission to rescue Harry is starting now. They were lead out of the room. With Madame Bones in the lead, they traveled down the hall and to an elevator, which took them down several floors. Their destination was a large room that contained nothing but people and a single object. Daphne recognized Tonks and Kingsley. Tonks was familiar with Harry and Kingsley had been their Dada professor last year. She didn't know anyone else. There were 6 oars total including Madame Bones. The object in the room was the steering wheel of a ship. It sat on a pedestal. The oars were already standing around it. They watched Daphne and her friends as they entered the room, their disbelieving eyes showing that they either had not been informed, or had not quite believed Amelia when she told them that Harry's friends would be going on this mission. Gather round the portkey, Amelia said. The coordinates have already been set. We won't be able to jump exactly to the Slytherin estate, but there's a town next to it that we can use as a starting point. Daphne moved to stand between Astoria and Tonks. The pretty oar looked down at her with an expression that all but asked, "What the bloody hell are you doing here?" I thought Madame Bones was joking when she said you lot would be coming with us. Daphne gave her a dry look. Is Madame Bones the type to joke like that? There's a first time for everything. Tonks shrugged. The space around the steering wheel was tight. Along with the 6 oars, there was Daphne and her friends, plus Headmaster Dumbledore, Remus, and Sirius. As things stood, Daphne felt like she and Astoria were on the verge of being squashed between Tonks and Kingsley. All right, everyone, Madame Bones said. Grab onto the portkey and don't let go. Do not worry, Headmaster Dumbledore added. We'll rescue Mr. Potter before you know it. Activate, Madame Bones said. That must have been the activation key, because seconds later, the world around Daphne spun in a dizzying display. Everything was a blur of color. The only thing she could see clearly were the people holding onto the steering wheel with her. Sadly, that just made the way her stomach churned and threatened to push up her breakfast even more unbearable. Faster and faster the world spun. Astoria was screaming in her ear. Her hand felt slick with sweat as she wrapped her sister in a one-armed hug. Hang on tight, Madame Bones shouted. Don't you dare let go. Despite her words, it was impossible that all of them could hang on. There were a lot of people gripping a single object. It didn't matter that a steering wheel was decently large. It wasn't meant to have so many people holding it. The first to let go was not one of her friends. It was an Auror whose face she didn't know. His screams echoed in her ears long after he vanished from sight. The others looked grim. Letting go during portkey travel wouldn't kill someone, but there was no telling where you'd end up. I think I'm slipping. Tracy shouted. Keep holding on, Madame Bones said. I don't think I can. I've got you, Kingsley said as he wrapped an arm around her waist. Mere seconds after he did so, his own grasp on the wheel became tenuous. Daphne screamed as Tracy and Kingsley both slipped off and disappeared. Susan woke up with a sharp gasp. Her body jolted, sending her into a sitting position. She looked around, blinking at the trees and foliage surrounding her. It didn't matter where she looked. There was nothing but trees, plants, animals, and the sky overhead. I see you're finally awake, a voice said in her ear. Rather than shriek, Susan scrambled to her feet. She moved her hand toward where her wand should have been, as she spun around to face whoever had snuck up on her. All of her movements ceased when she saw who was behind her. It was Tonks. Tonks grinned. That's me. Susan calmed down. Where are we? Scratching her head, Tonks looked up at the sky and frowned. There's no way to tell for certain. We were blown way off course. TCH. I knew having so many people use a single portkey was a bad idea. All that magic must have interfered with our ability to properly port. Still, I don't think we're that far from our original destination. From what I understand, Slytherin's home is supposed to located in a forested valley of some kind. It did indeed appear as though they were in a forest of some sort. She couldn't quite tell if they were in a valley. The trees blocked out much of the sky except what was immediately overhead. Strange sounds, the cawing of birds and the groaning of animals, played a mysterious melody that sounded ominous somehow. Susan noticed her wand lying several meters away. She walked over and picked it up, checking to see if it had broken during her fall. Nothing seemed wrong. She couldn't even find a crack, though it was a little dirty. It would need to be cleaned once she got back to Hogwarts. We should probably begin walking, Tonks suggested. See if we can't find that village. We should at least try to figure out where we are. Can you apparate us? Susan asked. Tonks shook her head. Not when I don't know the first thing about this place. It's dangerous apparating out of places you don't know. Only thing worse is apparating blind. Susan nodded and Tonks grinned. Well, at least it could be worse. How so? We could have been alone. Susan couldn't fault that logic, and together, she and Tonks picked a direction and began walking. Leaves and twigs crunched underneath their feet. The sounds seemed to become louder, or perhaps it was merely her perception of them. Susan turned her head as she tried to spot the animals that she could hear, but she saw none, perhaps because it was impossible to see through the thick tree branches. Watch out! Tonks shouted. Susan stopped moving and looked around. She turned and was just in time to see a mouth filled with sharp fangs in her vision. Shrieking, she stumbled backwards. Incendio. A brilliant cone of flames slammed into the snake before it could reach her, incinerating the whole thing in seconds. Susan looked at Tonks with wide eyes. The young Auror was sighing as she walked up to her. You okay? She asked, holding out a hand. Yeah, thank you, Susan said as she let Tonks help her up. Susan had no idea how long they walked, though it felt like hours. The trees eventually broke away, revealing a small dirt road that appeared untrod by human feet. With nothing else to do, they followed the road, eventually coming upon a village. Wooden houses of varying sizes sat haphazardly along the road. All of them were dilapidated with age. The walls of several had been torn down, there was mold growing on a few of them, vines encroached upon whatever remained, and there wasn't a soul in sight. Susan glanced to her right. What once appeared to have been a clothing store was now rubble, with only the broken sign with the word M-Lick Clothes written on it to signify what it had been. What do you think happened here? Tonks asked no one in particular. Your guess is as good as mine, Susan answered, despite recognizing the rhetoric behind Tonks's question. They wandered further into the village. It wasn't that large, maybe about 40 buildings in total. As they neared the other side, the sound of running feet made her ears twitch. She and Tonks both spun around, their wands out, prepared for anything. That was when Astoria rushed out from between two buildings. Story. Wait up! Daphne shouted as she rushed out of the same alley. She stopped upon spotting Susan and Tonks. You too. See. Astoria grinned, stopping in the middle of the street. I told you I heard voices down this way. I'm glad to see you too, Susan said, rushing up to Daphne and taking the other girl's hand. I was worried we wouldn't run into anyone here. Me too. Daphne smiled as she returned Susan's grip. Speaking of, I take it you two don't know where the others are. Nope, Tonks said. She walked up to them much more slowly. Her eyes constantly surveyed the area around her. Even so, I think the others should be in the general area. We were blown off course, but we were close to our destination. I imagine the others are somewhere in this forest. Headmaster Dumbledore was of the same mind, Daphne said as if to confirm a suspicion. Is the headmaster here? Asked Susan. Nope, Astoria was the one to reply. When we got thrown off the portkey, the headmaster was with us. We actually ended up in this village. He told us to wait here while he went to locate the others. That was probably a good idea, Tonks said. It's really boring. Though, Astoria whined. I want to do something. Patience, Story, Daphne said. This isn't a game. We can't just go off on our own. Astoria pouted. I know that. I'm just saying I wish there was something to do. Daphne gave Susan a helpless glare when she giggled, but it really couldn't have been helped. It was just too funny to see Daphne act like this. Back during their first year, Daphne's personality had been cold. She scorned the people around her, refused to spend time with anyone but Tracy and Blaze, and she always presented people with this chilly front, as though she had been made from ice. While that ice had thawed thanks to Harry, she had still been cool, collected, and sarcastic most of the time. Seeing how Daphne acted with her sister, so different from what Susan was used to, was simply too amusing. Since they didn't have anything to do but wait, Susan followed Daphne and Astoria to where they had been staying before the younger of the two ran off. It was one of the few buildings that remained fully intact. Larger than the others and made of brick instead of wood, Susan could only guess that it held more importance than the rest of the buildings. Perhaps it had belonged to the town mayor. The door creaked as they walked inside. A musty smell hit Susan's nose, causing it to wrinkle. It was the stench of mildew. There was no carpet inside. The floor was made of stone. There also weren't any furnishing, though she could see what appeared to be the broken down remains of a chair. She wondered how old this village was. How long had this place been abandoned? With nowhere to sit, Susan stood next to a wall. She was careful not to touch it. Even though it looked sturdy enough, there was no telling what might happen if there was any added weight. It could collapse for all she knew. How long do you think it's gonna be before Dumbledore comes back? Asked Tonks. Daphne shrugged. Hard to say. I suppose it would depend on how far apart everyone is and how long it takes him to find them. I guess you're right, Tonks said. I'm bored, Astoria added. We know, Daphne and Susan said at the same time. They ended up waiting several hours for the headmaster to locate all of their friends and the Aurors they had been with. One by one their friends appeared, most of them with an Auror by their side. It appeared that a good portion of the people with them had ended up with partners after getting flung off course. Blaze was the first to show up. He was quickly followed by Tracy, who showed up alongside Kinglesey Shacklebolt. Soon after, Lisa, Hannah, and Luna arrived. Then Neville and Terry appeared together alongside Madam Bones. It looks like everyone is here, Madam Bones said. That's good. At least we know that no one was flung into a mountain now. Why does it sound like you were expecting us to get thrown into a mountain? Asked Tracy, suspicion leaking through her voice. It's been known to happen. As Tracy paled, Madam Bones looked around at everyone's face. Then she nodded once. Time is precious, so we're moving out now. Fortunately, we've already located Slytherin's manor thanks to Igneous here. A man with plain features and dull brown hair waved a hand. He discovered the manor when he was flung off the portkey. He'll lead us there. That appeared to be the end of the conversation, because Madam Bones lead them all outside. They left the abandoned village behind. As they were walking, Susan looked back at the place, her mind brimming with curiosity. Headmaster Dumbledore moved to walk alongside her. That village was once known as Alabade, he told her. It was a lot like Godric's Hollow back during the early 1st century. Sadly, it fell to ruin during one of the many wars that plagued that time. So it was abandoned? Susan asked. Headmaster Dumbledore shook his head. While I am unclear on the details of what transpired here, I do know that Elabidia fell to ruin some time after Salazar Slytherin created Hogwarts. It seems an invading nation of Muggles had come and slaughtered everyone who lived in the village. That's terrible. The headmaster's sad smile was reflected back at her. It is indeed. It's especially tragic because it was the invasion itself that changed Salazar into the cruel and hateful man that he would become later in life. He paused. I'm not sure I could blame him for what happened. From what little text of that time survived, it seems his entire family was killed during the attack. The invaders stole into his house and butchered his family. It was Salazar's turning point, or so I've been led to believe. Susan didn't have much to say about that. However, Daphne, who walked along on Susan's other side with Astoria, looked up at the headmaster, a question reflected in her eyes. What do you mean by turning point? What I mean is that it was after the slaughter of his family that Salazar Slytherin became the pureblood supremacist that we know of him from the history books. It was said that until that point, Salazar had been a kind and caring individual. I have an old journal from Godric Gryffindor, and one of the entries stated that Salazar was the most patient and affable teacher among them. I see. Daphne grew silent after that. Susan didn't know what was going on through her friend's mind, but she imagined the bee-owned girl was absorbing everything that the headmaster had told her. Perhaps she was shocked by this knowledge. Susan sure was. The road eventually disappeared the further they got from the village, though it might have been more accurate to say that the road had become overgrown with plants. Susan nearly tripped over a vine several times. If it weren't for Daphne catching her, she might have fallen on her face like Tracy had when her foot got stuck in a root. Bloody F. King damn it. Tracy growled as she rubbed her now red nose. That hurts. Please mind your language, Ms. Davis, Headmaster Dumbledore said lightly, though with a hint of sternness. I don't see why everyone makes a big deal out of my language. Tracy scowled. Because it's not befitting of a lady, Madam Bones said. Because you're just a brat, Tonks added. I can't believe you two are making fun of me, Tracy said. Terry grinned at her. Why not? It's not that hard to do. Can it? Boot. Susan had no idea what they were looking for. A large mansion hidden within a sea of trees. A castle fortress built into a mountain. As she was wondering about what kind of place Salazar Slytherin's home was, their procession came to a sudden halt when her auntie raised a hand. Charlene. She asked, the only female Auror aside from her and Tonks. The one named Charlene was a fit young woman with black hair and skin a shade darker than Kingsley Shacklebolt. Nodding, Charlene unholstered her wand and began waving it around. Nothing happened at first, but then the area in front of them glowed a light blue. The blue light expanded, slowly at first but picking up speed, eventually turning into what looked like a large dome. It's a barrier, Charlene announced. A nasty one, too. It looks like whoever made this wanted to kill anyone coming here. This barrier is designed to fry the insides of whoever tries to pass this point. Susan's body shook. Beside her, even Daphne seemed slightly pale at this knowledge. Unlike her and the other kids, who were pale and withdrawn, Sirius Black whistled. That's quite the ward, though it sounds like it's new. New? Blaze asked. Yep. How do you figure? Sirius's lips peeled back to reveal a grin. Because if the scheme was older, it would have done more than just fry your insides. Blaze looked away. And now I regret asking that question. Times were different back then, Remus added. These days we have a lot of rules and policies about how we treat prisoners and what's considered self-defense over in excess. They didn't have any laws like that back then. It's why old ward schemes for noble houses like the Blacks are so deadly. How can you tell what the barrier does? Asked the ever-curious Lisa. The Nargles probably told her, Luna said. They're all over this area. I'm a decoder, Charlene said as she began waving her wand again. That's sort of like Gringotts curse breakers, but I don't break into ancient ruins. My primary job is taking down the wards surrounding the houses of criminals and the like. Charlene spent 20 years learning how to decode and break down wards, Madam Bones added. You always were fascinated by warding schemes, Headmaster Dumbledore said. I am pleased to see that you continued to follow your passion after graduating from Hogwarts. Charlene didn't look away from her work, but she did smile. Thanks, Headmaster. Susan watched Charlene as she wove her wand in complicated, seemingly never-ending patterns. She had no idea what the woman was doing. Every now and then, Charlene would stop, frown at something that nobody seemed capable of seeing but her, and then she would start wand waving again. She's decoding the wards based on the barrier's magical scheme, Daphne said. Excuse me? Susan asked, startled. Daphne nodded at Charlene. Wards like this are based on numerous arithmetic sequences that, when combined, create a barrier designed to serve a specific function. People like Charlene can read and decode those sequences by using a unique form of magic sight. I didn't know that, Susan said. I didn't know that you knew that, Tracy added. Where the frack did you learn this? Language, Daphne said before sighing. I learned it from the books in Father's library. Susan and Tracy waited for Daphne to say more. When it became apparent that she was done speaking, they turned to Astoria, who caught their eyes and shrugged. Don't look at me. I don't know squat about wards. Is learning magic sight hard? Asked Neville. It varies from person to person, but learning basic magic sight is generally an easy thing to do, Headmaster Dumbledore said. The problem is honing your magic sight to see arithmetic equations. That can take decades. Charlene is actually one of the people who mastered the skill faster than most. Oh. As they spoke, Charlene continued to work on breaking down the barrier. Susan couldn't see what she was doing beyond her wand movements. However, judging from the way Headmaster Dumbledore stared at the barrier, she assumed that he could see the ward schemes as they were being systematically destroyed. Nearly half an hour into her work, the blue barrier that had been erected around the vicinity suddenly disappeared. There. Charlene sighed. It's done. The wards have been destroyed. Excellent work, Madame Bones said, clapping Charlene on the shoulder. She then turned to the others. I want all of you to form ranks. The children will be in the middle. Kinglesey and I will take the lead, and Headmaster Dumbledore and Tonks will cover our rear. Sirius, Remus, Charlene, and Igneous will take positions on either side of the children. Follow me and be careful. Considering the purpose of that barrier, it's clear that someone is here, and they are definitely hostile. Moving slowly, as though afraid of what they could find, the group traveled into what could very well be the belly of the beast. The Slytherin Manor was smaller than Daphne had expected it to be. Granted, as she walked out from between the trees and came upon the building that could have only belonged to Salazar's family, she hadn't been sure what to expect. Even so, a building that looked more like a normal two-story house had not been it. There were no embellishments, no decorations, nothing to distinguish this house as belonging to Salazar Slytherin. Are you surprised? Headmaster Dumbledore asked upon seeing the expression of Daphne and her friends. You shouldn't be. Do not forget that Salazar lived during the 1st century. Homes back then didn't have the pomp and ostentatiousness of current houses, not even those belonging to families like the Slytherins. Even Hogwarts was not originally the castle that you all learn in. I'm still kinda underwhelmed here, Tracy. I was expecting a massive mansion. My parents' house is bigger than this. During the 1st century, this was considered large, Remus assured in a mild-mannered voice, sounding every bit the consummate instructor. Madame Bones turned around after surveying the house and looked at all of them, her face appearing even more stern than usual. Okay, everyone. This is it. From here on out, I want you kids to listen to every word I say. If I say run, you run. Do you understand me? The time for rebelliousness is officially over. If you can't follow my instructions, then I'll tie you up and leave you behind. Daphne didn't say anything. She stared at the faces of her friends. Lisa's features were a tad pale, and Hannah wasn't looking too good either. They were probably the least experienced with any sort of violence. Luna looked somewhat composed, albeit, Daphne couldn't read Luna like the others. Terry also didn't look good, but he was a boy, so he put on a brave front. No doubt he wanted to appear strong in front of everyone else. Even Blaise had a nervous sweat trickling down his forehead. Neville, oddly enough, did not appear worried on the surface. His face was stony. It was like he'd put a mask on. Daphne wondered if this was because of all the training he did with Harry, or if perhaps his pride was keeping him from displaying any fear. A hand slid into hers and gripped it tight, causing Daphne to glance at Astoria. Her sister's shoulders were shaking as she stared at the manor. No doubt the girl was afraid. While Daphne didn't say anything, even she felt weary. The atmosphere of this place was stifling and frightful, like there was something lurking beneath the surface that would leap out at them if given the chance. Taking their silence as affirmation, Madame Bones gestured for everyone to follow her. She led them up to the manor. An ancient door stood in front of the entrance. Oddly enough, while much of the building appeared aging, and even the door looked old, it was also in better shape than she had expected. There was no mildew, no mold, no splinters or anything of that nature. It looked well maintained, as though someone had taken to cleaning it daily. There's magical residue on this door, Igneous said. He waved his wand and the door began to glow with a green light. It looks like someone's been using cleaning and repair charms on it. Then we can probably expect the inside to be the same, Madam Bones said. Charlene and Igneous, you two take point. The rest of us will follow you. Be wary of traps. Yes, ma'am, the two Aurors said in unison. They opened the door, not slowly, but quickly, and Charlene and Igneous rushed in with wands at the ready. Madam Bones followed them, her own wand out. She gestured for them to stay where they were as she, Igneous and Charlene spread out. Daphne thought they were surveying the area for potential traps. After several more seconds, Madam Bones gestured for them to enter. The floorboards creaked as they walked in. Squealing and groaning, Daphne almost flinched at the sound of aged wound, wondering if it might break under their combined weight. The walls and ceiling all looked new, or at least newly repaired. There was none of the age or dullness she had expected. It showed that someone had probably used more repairing charms on this place. Daphne assumed that person was the same one who'd kidnapped Harry. The room they had entered was a small foyer. There was a staircase leading to the second floor, and hallways on either side of the staircase lead further into the first floor. It was built in the same style as her father's manor, only it was a lot smaller and the floors weren't made of marble. Wands out, Madam Bones said. We should be prepared for anything. Daphne, Susan, and everyone else silently pulled out their wands. Sirius also unholstered his new wand at the same time as Remus, and Headmaster Dumbledore already had his out and at the ready. For just a second, Daphne thought she saw the headmaster's face harden. However, it was only like that for an instant before reverting back to normal. It must have been a trick of the light. We'll explore the first floor before checking the second, Madam Bones explained. Kingsley, you're on point. Yes, ma'am, Kingsley said. This is getting kinda freaky, Tracy murmured. You mean it's getting real, Hannah said. I'm not sure I like this very much. Daphne wanted to tell her that if she didn't like this, then she shouldn't have decided to come. She couldn't bring herself to. Few people would ever wanted to do something like this. Hannah was pushing herself for Harry. She couldn't ask the girl for anything more. They went down the left hallway first. There were no lights, so the corridor was darker than Daphne was comfortable with. At least she could still see. Even so, she'd have liked to see more than just vague outlines and little to no color. There were doors along some of the walls. Madam Bones and Kingsley checked inside of the rooms, declaring each of them clear and having them move on. Daphne frowned at one point when she noticed that Tracy, who'd been walking beside her, was no longer beside her. She turned around and grimaced when she saw the girl taking a peek inside of the room that Kingsley had said had nothing in it. Come here, you. OWCH. Ow, ow, ow. Let go of my ear. I will when you learn not to move around on your own. Daphne pulled the girl back in line. There's no telling what kind of dangerous situations we might run into. You have to be more careful. I get it. I get it. Just let go. Be quiet. You too, Madam Bones snapped. You're both being too loud. We don't want whoever is here to be alerted to our presence. Sorry, Daphne apologized as she let go of Tracy's ear. Her friend grimaced and rubbed her ear, which was now a light red. Damn, that hurt. Sorry. It's fine. They continued moving. All of the rooms were declared empty. After 2 turns, Daphne realized that the hallway was looping around. They would probably end up back in the foyer if they kept moving. Ma'am, I believe I've found something, Kingsley said. He was standing next to an open doorway, and, having already peered inside, he was now staring at Madam Bones. What is it? Asked Madam Bones as she walked over to Kingsley. She peered inside of the door, hummed, and then came back. It looks like this is a kitchen. There's some leftover food on the tables. That at least tells us that someone is living here. It doesn't look like there's anything else, so let's keep moving. The longer they searched this place, the more anxious Daphne became. She could hear her heart pounding in her chest. Worry for Harry racked her nerves and made her hands become slippery with sweat. She glanced at the others. All of her friends seemed to feel the same way she did. They were pale, nervous sweat trickling down their brows. Neville was even wiping his hands on his robes. The hallway they were in did indeed come full circle. They ended up back in the foyer. Since they had already checked the first floor, the group ascended the stairs. Like floor 1, there were 2 directions they could take. They decided to go right this time. Their footsteps thudded along the hall, the sound echoing abnormally loudly in Daphne's ears. She could hear her own breathing pick up as they checked each room. There was nothing. There was no one. Until they got to the last room. "We've found him," Kingsley declared after peering into the room furthest from the stairs. "It's Harry and someone else. Female. Red hair." "That would be Ginevra Weasley," Madam Bones said. "Let's secure them and check to see if they're all right." Daphne tried to rush into the room, but Madam Bones looked at the group, halting them before they could proceed in. "Wait here until we declare the place secure." "Hey, wait. Daphne. Don't rush in." Daphne pushed past Madam Bones and ran into the room. There was nothing special about the room itself. It was a plain room with no carpet, gray walls, and a ceiling. There were no furnishings. However, lying in the center of the room were 2 figures, Harry and Ginny, both of whom lay crumbled on the floor. "Harry." The shout had not come from her, but from Susan. Daphne was almost shocked when the redhead rushed past her and knelt down in front of Harry. She placed a hand on Harry's shoulder as if to rouse him from slumber. "Harry. Harry, can you hear me? Say something." Before Daphne could reach him, before Kingsley could get Susan away from Harry, before anyone could do anything else, strange laughter bubbled from Harry's throat. It was a strange, gurgling laugh, so unlike Harry's normal laughter. Daphne slowed down as she reached him. Standing by Harry's feet, she couldn't contain the rising sense of wrongness as Harry's insane laughter echoed around the room. And then Harry spoke in a voice that was Harry's but not at the same time. "You're all too late," he cackled. "This body is mine." Daphne had just enough time to see a flash of red before the entire floor collapsed beneath them. The world around Harry was no longer what it had been. There was no ground, yet somehow he was standing. There were no walls, yet Harry still felt confined. The sky overhead was nothing but a dull, uniform gray that extended far beyond his line of sight. This place was not the prison that he'd been locked up in. This is your mind," a voice said to him. Harry turned. Walking, no, striding toward him with a confident gait was Tom Riddle, the man who had kidnapped him. He looked different, young but old, handsome but ugly. His skin had become more white than when Harry had confronted his diary self. Likewise, his eyes were not brown but yellow. His fingers, which Harry could see peeking from his robes, were long and spindly, like a skeleton's. Tom Riddle continued. "To be more exact, this is the space that I have created between your mind and mine. I suppose you could call it a link where our minds have melded together." Harry frowned. He had not realized there was a spell that could accomplish such a thing. This must have been one of the more esoteric rituals, something that only a few people in the entire world knew of. It could have even been an original spell. His frown deepened the longer he stared at Tom. There was something not right here. Harry felt on edge. His scalp was prickling, the hairs on his arms were standing on end, and his mind was blaring sirens to warn him of danger. All of the signs directed him toward one conclusion. Is it just me, or is he more powerful than before? "I am indeed more powerful," Tom Riddle said. His mouth didn't move, but Harry heard him all the same. "And it's all thanks to you. Who knew there'd be a piece of me locked away inside of your mind? Well, at least now I know why the killing curse failed. I won't make that mistake again." Harry had no idea what this man was talking about. A piece of himself. What did that mean? Regardless of what he did and didn't know, Harry knew one thing for sure. Whatever was going on here, it was clear that this, right now, was the point where Tom Riddle was going to try and take over his body. "I'm not going to let that happen." Tom Riddle smirked. "You don't have a choice." There was no prelude to their battle. Tom's wand flashed and a streak of red lightning erupted from the tip like a bolt of lightning arcing across the night sky. Harry threw himself out of the way, grimacing as he was jolted by the attack. If he could feel Tom's spell even though he had dodged, that meant this man had a lot more power than most. He couldn't afford to be hit directly. Two wands appeared in Harry's hands, exact replicas of the ones he had in the real world. It seemed that whatever he wanted to have happen here could happen. This was his mind, or perhaps the link between his mind and Tom's. That meant they could change the rules to suit their needs. In this battle, it would come down to skill, power, and will. Harry jabbed his wand forward. Flames burst from the tip, a roaring cone of fire that took the shape of an eastern dragon. The monster roared as it charged forward. It sadly didn't get very far, though, as a smirking Tom waved his wand and the flames suddenly reversed course, shifting from bright yellow to dark crimson. There was no time to dodge. Gritting his teeth as he thrust out his wand, Harry created a silvery barrier that the dragon slammed into. The shock wave from the attack could be felt even through his shield. Harry fell to a knee as cracks spread along the luminescent dome protecting him. With his lips twisting into a snarl, Harry raised his mother's wand and gave it a wave. Water blasted from the tip. It struck the shield, and then moved phased through the shield, striking the fire dragon head on. The ball slammed through the dragon, which dispersed, flames shooting in all directions. Like a cannon, it burst out of the other side and sailed toward Tom, who raised a dark black shield that it slammed into. The barrier held. Then it morphed into a massive black snake that towered over Harry as though it was a titan from Greek mythology. It hissed at him and leapt forward, its fanged mouth spread wide to swallow him whole. Harry flicked his wands at the ground. Two explosions launched him in the air, propelling him over the snake. He flicked his wands at the creature, sending a series of Maxima Bombarda spells into its magical hide. The snake was destroyed. He landed back on the ground and the battle began anew. "I'm always impressed by your talent, Potter." Tom cackled. "I knew after you defeated me that I had to have your body, and now I'm going to take it for myself." "There's no way I'll let you take my body," Harry retorted. Tom laughed some more. "You don't have a choice in the matter." The fight continued, with Harry and Tom throwing spells, countering spells, and dodging spells with equal fervor. Lightning flew from wands. Fire rained from the sky. Creatures of ancient myth were created from the ether to fight on either side. Harry did his best to counter Tom's attacks and retaliate with his own. Yet the longer the fight continued, the more Harry began to realize. Tom was better than him. Tom knew more spells than him. Tom was more refreshed than him. Harry had spent the past several days being starved, isolated, and beaten both physically and mentally. Before this battle had started, he was already approaching his limit. The longer the battle wore on, the more his mind deteriorated. His spells became slower, his power waned, and no matter how much harder he tried to push himself, he could not surpass the insurmountable wall that had been placed in front of him. It felt like Harry was fighting while stuck in a pool of sludge. His limbs became heavy. His mind became fuzzy. His vision was darkening. The world spun. He could scarcely breathe. Everything was getting blurry and he couldn't seem to lift his hands anymore. Tom Riddle grinned at him. "Good night, Harry." There was a flash of red. The last thing Harry heard was Tom Riddle's laughter. Daphne opened her eyes to find herself trapped within a glimmering silver barrier. Sitting up, she looked around, immediately spotting Astoria, Susan, Hannah, and Remus. They were within her in the barrier, awake and staring at something. Daphne turned her head. That something was the battle happening between Harry and the Aurors. Daphne had never seen anything like it. Harry wasn't using a wand, but spells were being launched from his hands. Red bolts of lightning, blue beams of water, shards of ice, every element flew from his hands and at the Aurors, who raised their shields to defend themselves. Harry was laughing all the while. "What's the matter? Can you not defeat me? Ha 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 ha. You're all weak. Pathetic. No wonder it was so easy for me to steal this body. You're all incompetent." What's going on?" Daphne asked. "What happened to Harry?" "I'm afraid that isn't Harry anymore," Headmaster Dumbledore said, shocking Daphne. She hadn't even noticed his presence, but now she realized that the reason she and the others were protected by a barrier was because the headmaster had created it. She could see the thin strands linking his wand to the dome surrounding her and another one several meters away. "What do you mean that isn't Harry anymore?" asked Astoria. "I mean that he's been possessed," Headmaster Dumbledore explained. "And it looks like a full possession too." What does that mean? Susan asked, stroking something red. It was only now that Daphne noticed the unconscious Ginny Weasley with her head on Susan's lap. I means that Harry's mind and soul has been suppressed by whoever is possessing him, Remus said, his hands clenched. A full possession is when someone sends their soul into another body and gains absolute control over it. Daphne didn't understand the idea of possession, but she understood the gist of it. Someone else was currently inhabiting Harry's body, suppressing his mind and spirit in order to control his body, or something like that. The only thing she cared about was that Harry's body was being used by somebody else. That was unforgivable. Ha 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 ha. What's the matter? Are you having trouble hitting me? The usurper said with Harry's voice. He waved his hand, causing the ground in front of him to explode. It became a wave, which swept toward the oars as if to bury them alive. Madame Bones stood at the helm, waving her wand in a complicated pattern. Strange slivers of nearly invisible energy sliced through the air. They cut into the wave. The wave was split apart into several hundred slices and fell apart. That was when Tonks jabbed her wand at the remains. The ground shifted and combined, growing bigger and bigger until it had become a massive golem. The golem raised its gargantuan hand and brought it down toward Harry. It didn't even get close to hitting him. Seconds after it began to bring its hand down, it caught fire. It wasn't just any fire either. This fire screamed and raged, hissed and spat like venomous serpents. Fiend fire. The dark fire used primarily by wizards who've steeped themselves in the dark arts. The golem disintegrated. Ha 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 ha. The insane laughter of Harry's possessor echoed around the room. This body is perfect. I've never felt so much power flowing through me before. The face of Harry darkened in ways that Daphne had never seen before. There's even more power in this body than my original body when I was his age. Were it not so useful, I'd have killed this boy for his pertinence. You won't be doing any killing today, Tom, Headmaster Dumbledore said. Tom? Madame Bones asked with a frown. Harry laughed. Ah, Dumbledore. I was wondering when you would recognize me. Was it the spells? It was, wasn't it? I bet you recognized them. It was hard not to, the headmaster replied mildly. I've seen you use those spells many times during our numerous fights. Dumbledore, who is this? Asked Madame Bones. The headmaster sighed. That is none other than the man you all know as Lord Voldemort. It was like everyone in the room had been struck by lightning. Those words were so shocking. Voldemort. He was the one who had possessed Harry. How? He shouldn't have been anywhere near Harry, unless. Ginny. Daphne mumbled. Excuse me? Asked Susan. He was possessing Ginny before Harry, Daphne explained. That's how he slipped past Hogwarts' defenses. He was probably buried deep inside of Ginny's mind, which is why it didn't activate any defenses. Voldemort must have been biding his time and waiting until Dumbledore was gone. I bet he even launched that attack on Hogsmeade knowing that Lucius Malfoy would somehow force Headmaster Dumbledore to leave Hogwarts. While she had no evidence to support this, she was positive it was true. The ambush in the Shrieking Shack. The attack on Hogsmeade. The incident with the suits of armor attacking Harry. There was no one else who had the means or motive to do such things. Plus, he had been there this whole time, hiding within the body of an unsuspecting girl. No one would have imagined that Ginny was responsible for this. You mean all this time we've been hanging out with the Dark Lord? Astoria wrinkled her nose. That's gross. Daphne didn't respond to her sister. Her eyes were locked on the battle that had begun anew. Voldemort in Harry's body had created a whip made of fiendfire in his left hand. The other hand was casting everything from standard cutting curses to darker spells, a few of which Daphne recognized from her father's library. Madame Bones and the other Aurors did their best to fight against Voldemort. Several would defend against his attacks while the others would attack in turn. Perhaps it was due to her talent, but Madame Bones acted as both defender and attacker. She launched spells while creating barriers and even countering several of the spells thrown at her. Despite how well she was doing, how well they were defending against Voldemort, he was still pushing them back. Several curses leapt from the wands of Tonks and Kingsley, who acted as their primary attackers. The spells never reached their target. Voldemort waved his, Harry's, hand, and the spells suddenly reversed course. They stopped when Charlene and Igneous created shields, but then Voldemort waved his hands and those shields broke. Igneous and Charlene's screams echoed across the room as the backlash sent them to their knees. Laughing, Voldemort raised another hand. Several small spheres of crackling dark energy appeared above his head and were sent hurtling toward Charlene and Igneous. Madame Bones stepped in front of them. She slashed her wand horizontally through the air. A massive gust erupted from the tip and slammed into the crackling spheres, forcing them to detonate. Susan, Astoria, and Hannah screamed as a fierce wind erupted around their dome. Crackling black energy coruscated off the surface. The shields flickered as though it was about to break. "I don't want to be here anymore," Hannah screamed. Daphne understood her. This was beyond them. Even part of her mind was telling her to flee, but she couldn't. Harry was suffering, his mind suppressed. She wanted to do something for him. She wanted to save him, even if she knew that there was nothing she could do. "Do not worry," Headmaster Dumbledore said to them, grunting as though he was struggling against an unknown assailant. The magic threads attaching his wand to the shields wavered before being restored. "I'll not let any of you get hurt." The magic dispersed soon, allowing Daphne a clear view of the battle. Charlene and Igneous were back on their feet. Their movements were sluggish, though. Tonks and Kinglesey were compensating by switching to defense. Meanwhile, Madame Bones was a whirlwind fighting against the monster that had taken over Harry's body. They were tiring. Their movements were slowing down. Shields were barely being raised in time to block spells, and each shield cracked and shattered, unleashing a powerful backlash that hurt the ones raising them. Shield Breaker. It was a powerful curse used in dueling that was cast by overloading shield spells with magic that had been polarized using a theory Daphne knew little about. Each time it was used, the spell injured and zapped the strength of the person who'd cast a shield spell. Only Madame Bones was in good enough shape to keep fighting strong. She barely used any shields, and when she did, it was to counter a spell and bring it down immediately after. The Dark Lord couldn't use Shield Breaker on her. That said, it didn't seem to matter since he was still pushing her back through other means. "Headmaster," Daphne started. "Why are you not fighting? If you were the one fighting against the Dark Lord, I'm sure you could beat him." The headmaster's smile seemed unusually somber. "It is true that if I were to fight, I would win, but I'm afraid doing so might destroy Harry in the process." Daphne's eyes widened as the headmaster looked at the battle. Harry's magic is powerful, and when combined with Tom's wide array of deadly spells, I would not be able to hold back while fighting. So even the headmaster was incapable of doing anything to save Harry. That didn't bode well. Daphne glanced at the battle. Igneous and Tonks were both down, and they were being protected by Charlene and Kingsley. Yet those two were taking a beating. Even Madame Bones was beginning to show her fatigue in her slowing movements and the cuts that were starting to litter her body as spells slipped past her defense. "Isn't there anything we can do?" Daphne asked, clenching her hands. At this rate, Harry will." "There is something that you can do," Headmaster Dumbledore said. "However, it's a dangerous endeavor. I don't know if it's worth the risk." Daphne felt her determination harden. "What can I do? If there's something I can do, tell me and I'll do it." Headmaster Dumbledore smiled, though it was filled with weariness. "Harry is still inside. Tom cannot separate Harry's soul from his body right now. That would require a ritual that takes far more time than he can afford to spend at the moment. I believe it's possible to bring Harry's mind to the surface. However, it's going to take something that only a few people in this world can give." "What is that?" Daphne asked. "Love." Daphne blinked. The headmaster smiled. "If you can show Harry how loved he is, how much you need him with you, I believe that he can push Tom out of his mind. At the very least, he should be able to suppress Tom so that I can seal him away." "What do you need me to do?" Daphne asked. "I need you to try anything you can think of to bring Harry back," the headmaster said. "It will have to be something drastic, though." Daphne looked back at the battle, at the cackling Harry as he tossed fireballs at the Aurors, who were down to just Madame Bones. She was straining, struggling. It wouldn't be long before she lost. "Harry." She looked back at the headmaster. "I'll do it. And I'll help," Sirius's voice said. Daphne blinked. She hadn't realized it, but Sirius was sitting in the other dome alongside Blaze, Neville, Terry, Trace, and Luna. That's my godson over there. You can't expect me not to help out, especially since you're the reason I'm stuck behind this damn barrier. The headmaster smiled. I apologize for that, but had I let you out, you would have tried to join the fight. The Aurors are a well-oiled machine that utilizes teamwork. Your participation would have ruined that. Whatever. Just let me help Harry now and we'll call it even. I'll be helping as well, Remus said as he stood up and drew his wand. He was bleeding from a cut on his forehead, but he appeared ready. Very well. Headmaster Dumbledore nodded. Now, it's unfortunate, but when I drop these barriers, I would like the rest of you to run. I cannot protect more than one person here. Can all of you do that? I want to help too, Susan mumbled. Headmaster Dumbledore shook his head. I'm sorry, but I can only protect one, and I believe Daphne is most suited towards this task right now. You are currently lacking in determination and resolve when it comes to your feelings for Harry, whereas Daphne already has her heart set. Susan looked away. Daphne had spoken with her many times about Harry. She wanted Susan's help in securing a future. Even if Susan couldn't be Harry's first wife thanks to her status as the heiress to the ancient and most noble House of Bones, she could take the position of second wife. If Susan did that and Daphne became Harry's mistress, it meant she would have 3 of the founding 5 houses behind her back. She and Astoria would be protected from their father's machinations. It looks like we're nearly out of time, the headmaster said. Indeed, it looked like Madame Bones was on her last leg. The Dark Lord was just toying with her now. I'm going to drop the barrier. When I do, all of you except Daphne will run out of here and get as far away from possible. Sirius, Remus, I'll let you 2 stay, but I won't be able to protect either of you. Don't worry about that, Sirius said with a grin, his wand already in hand. I can protect myself just fine. I'll keep Sirius from getting injured, Remus said. Headmaster Dumbledore nodded. Susan, take Ginny with you. Susan hesitated for a second, but she soon nodded. Okay. It's time. I'm dropping the barrier. Daphne barely had a moment to think about her situation. The barrier dropped a mere second after Dumbledore spoke, and from that moment on, everything became chaos. Her friends were running one way. Sirius and Remus were leaping into the fray against the Voldemort-possessed Harry, and she was following behind Dumbledore as he protected her from errant spells that came their way. Snap out of it, Harry, Sirius said as he threw a slew of spells that Daphne couldn't name at Tom. They were all swatted away like bugs. Tom Riddle laughed. Harry's not coming back, you fool. This body is mine now. Like hell it is, Sirius snarled as he waved his wand at the broken down wall. The wall changed into numerous vines that tried to grab Tom. Get out of my godson. Harry, Remus shouted. You're stronger than this. Don't let him control you. Fools. Harry's gone. His cackle was like a prelude to destruction. Tom swept his hand out, wiping the vines out like they were nothing. The explosion that followed slammed into Daphne, who screamed as the headmaster shielded her. Her scream must have reached them because Tom Riddle paused. For just a second, Daphne thought she saw the yellow eyes of Tom change back into Harry's emerald color. Harry. Daphne called out to him. Harry, it's me. Come back to me. Don't let Voldemort control you. Tom smirked. Little girl. Harry is gone. I own this body now. You're lying. Daphne snapped. Harry is in there. Harry. Don't let that has-been control you. Tom twitched. Has been. Headmaster. Daphne said. I need you to get me closer. That will be difficult, but I'll do my best, Headmaster Dumbledore said. Sirius. Remus. I'm already ahead of you. Sirius said as he cast several dozen spells in just as many seconds. He strung them together so quickly that Daphne had trouble counting them. Tom countered the spells with ease, but there were so many that he couldn't attack. Sirius was like a storm. He created a never-ending stream of spell, chaining them together in a ceaseless pattern. Daphne had once heard from her father that Sirius had been the most skilled duelist at Hogwarts. She could see what made him so talented. It didn't help that Remus was also attacking. Unlike Sirius, who chained spells together like it was as natural as breathing, Remus used transfiguration. Rubble turned into snakes that tried to bite Tom's legs. Spears were conjured and sent at Tom like thrown javelins. Lions, birds, antelopes, everything within the room became an animal that tried to attack Tom Riddle. While Sirius and Remus launched an offensive attack that forced Tom on the defense, Headmaster Dumbledore created large walls that rose from the ground and boxed Tom in. The man in Harry's body would move one way as if to dodge, and then he'd find himself hitting a wall. It added a new dynamic that the man couldn't seem to accommodate for. "Now is your chance, Ms. Greengrass," Headmaster Dumbledore said. What? It wasn't until the words were spoken that Daphne realized what he meant. The obstructions, large walls that the headmaster had raised from the ground, created a path. If she used them as cover, she could reach Harry. She took a deep breath. This was it. I'm on it. Daphne rushed out from behind the headmaster. She made it to one of the walls and pressed her back against it. Headmaster Dumbledore was really letting loose now. She couldn't see what he was creating, but she could see his wand moving more furiously than before. Another deep breath. Daphne rushed out from behind the cover and made it to another wall. She peered around the corner. Tom hadn't noticed her. His back was turned. He was being forced to focus solely on defense as he fought against 3 wizards, one of which was the greatest wizard in recent history. This was her chance. I can do this. She stepped out from behind the wall and lunged. What? Tom shouted as Daphne slammed into his back and wrapped her arms around his stomach. Come back to me, Harry. Come back. I need you. Daphne screamed. Tom laughed, a cackling and mad laugh that bubbled from his throat like miasma from a volcano. Stupid girl. I told you this body is. He paused, his body jerking. And no, I got rid of you. This is my body now. It's mine. No. Another voice shouted. It was the same as before, but Daphne recognized the tone. That was definitely Harry's voice. This body isn't yours. It's mine. I won't let you have it. Fight him, Harry, Daphne said. Daphne. Harry turned his head to look at her. I don't think I can hold him for very long. You have to get away. I'm not going anywhere. But you'll be in. Who cares if I'm in danger? Daphne interrupted. You're more important to me than my own life. I need you here with me. I want you here with me. A life without you isn't a life I want. G. Harry clenched his teeth. He flailed in her arms, but Daphne kept her grip tight. You'll bother this boy no more, Tom. Headmaster Dumbledore shouted as he chanted several verses in a language that Daphne didn't know, and then pointed his wand at Harry. A loud scream erupted from Harry's mouth. His back arched. His body spasmed. He must have been experiencing intense pain. Daphne didn't know what to do, so she did the only thing she could think of. She held onto him and refused to let go. Light engulfed his body. It was brief but brilliant. Then the light disappeared and, after a second of silence, Harry slumped backwards like dead weight. Whoa! Daphne cried as she was taken down with him. She somehow managed to land in a sitting position. Harry ended up on her lap. Harry, please say something. Harry groaned as he blinked several times. Dull emerald eyes looked at the world around them before landing on her. Maybe it was just her imagination, but those eyes seemed to get more vibrant with her in them. Daph, he mumbled. Are you okay? Daphne felt like crying. You're the one who's been possessed and you're asking me if I'm okay. What kind of idiot are you? I rather resent being called an idiot, he said. He closed his eyes. I'm sorry, Daphne. I let myself get kidnapped and forced you into a dangerous situation. If only I had been more careful, then. If you blame yourself for something like this, I'm never going to forgive you, Daphne said, holding him closer. Forget about what happened. This isn't your fault. None of us could have seen this coming, so you shouldn't blame yourself. Harry looked away, but Daphne grabbed his face and forced him to keep his eyes on her. And if you can't do something by yourself, then you can rely on me. Daphne. She gulped before giving him a determined look. I love you, Harry. I know we're young, but I don't want to use that as an excuse to not admit how I feel. I love you, and I'm not going to let you go. Harry opened his mouth, but he never got the chance to speak, because Daphne chose that moment to surge forward and hamper his lips with her own. Naturally, she had forgotten all about Sirius, Remus, and Headmaster Dumbledore, until Sirius Wolf whistled at them. "Oh, my, I hadn't realized your relationship had progressed that far," he said. "Should I get you two a room?" Daphne jerked her face away from Harry and tossed Sirius a blushing glare, which he merely laughed off. Headmaster Dumbledore smiled. "I believe we should leave now. There are many injured, and it would be best if we get all of them, including Mr. Potter, to the St. Mungos." Daphne wanted to spend more time with Harry, but, well, she wanted to spend that time with him alone. Needless to say, she wasn't going to argue. Rousing the Aurors was difficult. All of them had taken a huge beating, even Madame Bones was not without injury. She was bleeding from a head wound, and her left arm was blackened and the skin cracked. It turned out they had not been able to fight at full strength because, much like the headmaster, none of them wanted to harm Harry's body. This had left them open to retaliation. Tom Riddle had taken advantage of that fact to beat the Aurors into submission. "I feel like someone cracked my head open with a bat," Tonks complained as she leaned on Kingsley for support. "Ah," Harry blushed. He was leaning on Daphne. "I'm not sorry about that." Tonks waved him off. "Nah, it's not your fault. No worries." "I still can't believe what happened here," Charlene muttered. "No one is going to believe me when I tell them about this," Igneous agreed. "No one will be telling anyone about what transpired here," Madame Bones scolded them both. "All of you are going to be bound by a magical oath to never speak of this moment to anyone who wasn't here. I'll make up an excuse about what happened for the minister and the Daily Prophet. Are we clear?" "Ma'am," the Aurors all said in unison. The group left Slytherin's manor after that. Headmaster Dumbledore ended up performing a mass apparition once they reached the village of Elibidia. The magic required to apparate so many people drained even the headmaster, forcing him to retreat to Hogwarts after they had arrived. Harry Potter was dropped off at St. Mungo's along with the Aurors. While Madame Bones and the others were allowed to leave a day after being received, Harry was asked to stay for an extra week. Daphne had not seen Harry since he was admitted to St. Mungo's. This also meant she hadn't been able to talk to him about her key, which had been so rudely interrupted by Sirius. The Daily Prophet had apparently gotten wind that Harry had been rescued, and they were currently heaping praises on the Auror department, Madame Bones, and Headmaster Dumbledore. Daphne had already read several articles that stated how quick they were to respond. It seemed like whatever plan Lucius had been concocting had backfired. That said, Daphne still didn't know what Lucius had been planning, or if he'd even had a plan. Daphne and the others had been left out of the spotlight. No one knew that they had gone to rescue Harry, and it seemed as though Madame Bones wished to keep it that way. Personally speaking, Daphne was grateful. She had no desire to be in the spotlight. Because Defense Against the Dark Arts was without a professor, Headmaster Dumbledore had temporarily taken the position. He was an amazing teacher. The headmaster spoke in a way that was easy to understand and put everyone at ease. He not only answered any questions asked, but he would show them practical examples, provided such examples could be given. In some ways, his instructions reminded Daphne a lot of Harry. They had similar teaching methods. While the school had returned to a semblance of normality, Daphne and the others still chose to use the Chamber of Secrets as their meeting place, more often than not. Daphne was sitting on the couch. There was a sheet of parchment and a quill in front of her, but she didn't touch it. All of her homework was done anyway, so all she'd be doing was revisions, and she really didn't feel like doing that at the moment. "Daph, would you mind reading my report to make sure everything is correct?" Astoria asked. Withholding a sigh for her sister's sake, she offered the girl a smile. "Sure." Astoria grinned as she handed the report over. "Sorry about this. I normally get Harry to look over it, but he's not here right now." "Don't remind me." Daphne let her eyes scan over the report, which was on the many uses of flobberworm mucus in potions. It looked like Astoria's information was accurate enough. However, there was a lot of information that was missing. "Flobberworms aren't just used in the Wiggenweld potion," Daphne said after she finished reading it. "Because it's used as a thickener, they can be added to any potion that requires a thicker viscosity." "What are they?" asked Astoria. "That is something you should find out on your own." The pout on Astoria's face was adorable. The words she said were, "Harry would have told me what they are." "Harry isn't here," Daphne replied. "You're also lying. Harry prefers leading you to the answer instead of just giving it to you." "Nice try, though." TCH. Astoria clicked her tongue as she stood up, snatched her papers, and waltzed over to the table where everyone else was sitting. Daphne leaned back in her seat. Closing her eyes, she rubbed her eyelids, which felt sore because she'd stayed up way too late last night. She blamed Tracy for wanting to spend all night gossiping. Daphne's body shifted when an added weight caused depressions to form in the couch. Opening her eyes, she glanced at Susan, who had taken a seat on her right. The girl didn't look at her. Twiddling her thumbs, Susan's red face and shifting eyes became her most prominent features. "Something wrong, Sue?" Susan shook her head. "I wanted to talk to you about Harry." Perking up, Daphne focused more on her friend. "Have you made a decision on what you want out of your relationship with him?" "I have," Susan said. "I've been thinking about it a lot, and I've realized that while I do love Harry, I don't want to be in polygamous relationship. I don't want that kind of relationship. If I was going to marry someone, I'd want to be the most important person in their life instead of just one of several." A sharp jolt hit Daphne in the chest. I see. I'm sorry." Susan looked away. "I know that's not what you wanted to hear." Breathing out a deep sigh, Daphne gave her friend a weary smile. "It's okay. I understand that most people wouldn't want to be in that kind of relationship." Daphne had known for years that unless she was married to the second or third son of a noble house, someone who couldn't become the head, then becoming a mistress was the most she could ask for. She'd grown up knowing this, expecting it even. On the other hand, Susan's life had been normal. The girl had been raised by a loving aunt, and there had been no expectations placed on her. There was also the politics to think about. Susan Bones was the heiress to a founding house. If she became a second wife, it would be like saying that the Bones were less important than the Potters. Of course, Susan wasn't the type to care about politics, but Daphne could at least see the logic behind any potential political reasons that her friend might have for not accepting her proposal. "If you don't mind me asking, why are you willing to be in a relationship like that?" asked Susan. Daphne debated on what she should tell Susan. Since the girl was not going to go along with her plans, she didn't know if she should entrust her reasons and objective to her friend. At the same time, even if she couldn't gain Susan as a sister through bonds of marriage, perhaps she could at least get herself an ally to help her achieve what she wanted. "There's a lot of reasons, but if I had to name one, I'd say it's for the sake of my goals," Daphne admitted. "Your goals?" Susan inquired. "I want to protect Astoria from our father." Daphne glanced at her sister, who was excitedly talking to Luna, using wild gesticulations to explain whatever point she was trying to make. "In order to protect my sister, I need to gather as many allies as possible, strong allies who can stand up to my father should the time ever come." "There's no greater alliance than one of marriage," Susan murmured. "Exactly." Daphne smiled at her. If Harry had multiple wives from powerful families, they could form an alliance that not even father can go up against. As the heiress to the founding house of Bones, your power combined with Harry's would have been enough to keep even him from trying anything. Of course, there's also the fact that I do want to continue the family name. Even if I don't like my father anymore, the Greengrass name originally belonged to my mother. Father married into the family. I suppose you could say that this name is the only tie I have left to my mother, and I would like to keep it. Susan's face scrunched up as she struggled to follow Daphne's line of thinking. "So, in order to keep your family name, you're willing to become Harry's mistress?" "Yes," Daphne replied. "If I became his wife, I would take his name and our children would also take his name. If I became his second wife, my second child would be able to take the Greengrass name, but I would still be Potter. By becoming his mistress, I can retain the Greengrass name, and my firstborn child can also inherit the family name and responsibilities therein." Having thought about her situation long and hard, this was the conclusion that Daphne had come to, the only outcome that would allow her to gain everything she wanted. Her sister would be protected and wouldn't married off to some rich noble who would abuse her. Daphne would have allies who could help defend their freedom, and even if she wasn't his wife, she would still get to be with Harry, the boy she loved. Daphne didn't care about what her title was. She didn't have the sort of feminine pride that would keep her from letting another woman marry the man she loved. Her father had beaten those out of her. However, even if she lacked the sort of pride that Susan had, Daphne still possessed her ambition, and she would do whatever was necessary to achieve her goal. I suppose I can understand where you're coming from, Susan said at last. And I respect your decision, even if I don't agree with it. Thank you. You're welcome. So, Daphne said after a moment of silence. Does this make us rivals? Susan tilted her head, appearing to think about it for a moment. No, she said, shaking her head. I don't think I'm really suited to being by Harry's side. I love him, but I think he's a bit too much for me to handle. Daphne felt a jolt race down her spine. She was shocked. She became more surprised when Susan smiled at her. I think if anyone here is suited to being with Harry, it's you. That's why, I'll do whatever I can to support you. Daphne's eyes stung, and it was with great astonishment that she realized she was crying. She did her best to wipe her eyes before the tears could fall. Thanks, Sue. Susan smiled at her. You're welcome, she said simply. You have to be the single most troublesome patient I have ever met, Harry. You really are. I don't think I've ever met someone who brought me so many problems. Harry listened to Ms. Smith, his Medowitch, while sitting on the hospital bed. He'd been confined to that bed for a whole day before his Medowitch had allowed him to move around. Of course, he wasn't allowed to leave St. Mungo's, but at least they had let him wander the hospital. He'd gone to see the Longbottoms and spoke with them a few times, though they couldn't converse, and he had even visited Ginny. The girl was staying in the hospital for the rest of the term. The staff at St. Mungo's wanted to have her remain with them in case there were repercussions for being under a long-term possession. Despite that, Ginny seemed to have been in decent cheer. It might have helped that Harry told her that he didn't blame her for what happened. During his stay at St. Mungo's, Ms. Smith had periodically cast numerous scans on his body, including several lunar-based rituals. It was actually the rituals that were the reason for his prolonged stay. Each one scanned his body in a different way than the others. Ms. Smith had told him that they were designed to detect foreign magic, dark magic, and various other types of spellwork that had been done to him. She had just finished her last scan today. I know, and I do apologize for that, Harry said. So, what's the verdict? Well, you definitely have a piece of the Dark Lord's soul locked in your scar, Ms. Smith stated matter-of-factly. I still can't believe it, but it looks like the fragment can't be removed without killing you, so we have no choice but to leave it there. At least Headmaster Dumbledore did a good job of sealing it away. Harry grimaced at the reminder that he had a piece of Voldemort inside of his head. It wasn't a pleasant thought, but he figured that things could have been worse. Thanks to Headmaster Dumbledore, the soul fragment was sealed inside of a prison that it couldn't break out of. Unlocking the prison required a key, and that key was with the headmaster himself. So long as Harry's mentality remained stable, the seal wouldn't break. Since all of the testing is done, does that mean I'll be able to leave? Asked Harry. Yes, Ms. Smith said. Someone is coming to pick you up sometime today. Once they're here, you are free to leave. Which meant Harry could do nothing but wait. Since that was the case, Harry focused on cataloging the events that had transpired and thinking about what he should do in case something like this happened again. Harry had been foolish. It had been his complacency that had allowed him to be kidnapped. Had he been more attentive, it wouldn't have happened. He also shouldn't have let Ginny Weasley get so close to him. It should have been obvious that she was the source of the trouble. She'd been possessed last year, so logically, she should have been one of his prime suspects. The fact that the thought hadn't even crossed his mind was shameful. At least I don't need to worry about Ginny being possessed again. Ms. Smith had scanned Ginny herself and pronounced the girl clean. Harry trusted her judgment. If she said that there was no longer a Dark Lord inhabiting the girl's body, then it meant there was no Dark Lord. A wandering Medi-nurse eventually walked into his room. Mr. Potter, your godfather is here to pick you up. Harry left the hospital room and walked into the waiting room. Sirius was there, in the center of the room, wearing his usual grin. Harry, he cheered, pulling him into a strong hug. Glad to see you're fully mended. Awkwardly returning the hug, Harry said, I don't know if I'd call myself mended, but I'm not a cripple, at least. Gotta be thankful for the little things. Sirius stepped back and grinned him. Anyway, I'm here to escort you to Hogwarts. Then what are we waiting for? Harry asked. He walked beside Sirius as they exited St. Mungo's. Sirius then placed a hand on Harry's shoulder, and, with a soft crack, the two apparated away. The end of the year involved exams as always. Harry wasn't worried about his results. Even though the last fourth of his school year had been hectic and filled with danger, he was positive that he had passed with flying colors. In fact, he wouldn't have been surprised if he was still at the top of his class. Of more concern to Harry was his relationship with Daphne, specifically the key she had given him after saving him from being controlled by Tom Riddle aka Voldemort. He could have played the ignorant card. He could have tried to pretend that she'd just key-ed him in the heat of the moment. That would have been the rational thing to do, but it wouldn't have been right. Daphne's key had been a heartfelt expression of her feelings. Harry had known about them for a while now. He wasn't foolish enough to believe that the constant hand-holding and closeness was because she had familial feelings for him. This girl wasn't Lisa Croft. They didn't have the almost family-like connection. He didn't know what to do, or even what he wanted to do. Two options lay before him, but he didn't know which one to pick, which choice was correct, or even what choice he wanted to be correct. His mind was a jumbled mass of confusion. Part of him wanted to accept Daphne, to respond to her feelings. Yet he couldn't tell if that part of him was genuine or just hormones. This would be so much easier if puberty didn't exist. The problem with going through puberty was that Harry still felt, well, horny a lot more than he'd have liked. His mind was still plagued by dreams of himself with Daphne, Susan, Lisa, or any number of females that his perfect memory could call up. That was the problem. His body was so overflowing with hormones that even Lisa Croft, the girl he loved like a sister, had not been spared from his erotic dreams. How could he trust his heart when his body constantly wanted to do something lascivious to the girls around him? To her credit, Daphne acted as if nothing had happened between them. He didn't know if she was pretending or if there was another reason. Even so, he was grateful. It gave him some space to think, and he had more than enough on his mind that needed thinking about. Issues with Daphne and his own feelings aside, the last few days of school were pleasant. Harry spent most of his time relaxing with his friends. They would go out to the Black Lake and have picnics, or spend time in the Chamber of Secrets and play games. Neville had become Harry's exercise and sparring partner. His fellow Gryffindor loved the weights, and since they were both keen on getting the most out of them, they had become each other's spotter. He also played chess with Blaise, Terry, and Lisa. It was wizard's chess. Harry still didn't understand the need for the pieces to destroy each other, but he supposed he wasn't meant to understand. He'd also taken to broom racing with Tracy, who used every opportunity she could to make him race around the track with her. He always won. However, that only seemed to inspire her to try harder. Apparently, she wasn't a fan of losing when it came to anything that dealt with brooms. Perhaps the most surprising person he interacted with was Susan. Before now he kept getting mixed signals from her. Sometimes it seemed like she wanted to be closer to him, and other times he felt like she was avoiding him. After he returned from the hospital, she had greeted him with a smile and spoke with an easiness that had not been present before. Gone was the awkward feelings between them. She spoke to him freely and without hesitation. He liked this change. During the last day of school, Harry headed down to the Great Hall with Neville and Astoria and met up with the others. Most of the conversation taking place around them was about the finals. It was nice to see that Hogwarts had returned to a sense of normality, though some things would never be the same again. Several students had been pulled out of Hogwarts. There were a number of concerned parents who no longer wanted their child to learn from this institute, and the problem was that no one could blame them. With all that had happened, it only made sense. Of course, only 10 students had been pulled, but in a school that only boasted about 200 people, 10 was still a lot. As always, the headmaster gave a closing speech after everyone had their fill of food. The end of the year is usually a time of joy. Summer means being able to relax and unlearn all of the things you've learned. Sadly, even though this year should have been a time where students are anticipating the fun they can have over the summer holidays, this year has been marked by tragedy. A somberness entered the Great Hall. Some students stifled sobs. They were probably friends of the people who'd been killed. We will never forget the people who were killed during the unmitigated attack on Hogsmeade. Such tragedies always leave their scars, and even if time heals all wounds, they cannot erase them. I wanted to take this time to apologize for not being able to stop these events from taking place. Had I been more diligent, perhaps those students who lost their lives would still be with us. His words caused a stirring among the students. Their shock was nearly palpable. It was not often that the headmaster apologized for failing. Even Harry felt a moment of surprise. I plan to become more diligent in the future, Headmaster Dumbledore continued. To that end, I plan on quitting my role as the Supreme Mugwump for the International Confederation of Wizards. Shocked gasps echoed across the Great Hall. Even the teachers were staring at the headmaster like he'd suddenly transformed into a Cerberus. I believe I have been stretching myself too thin, the headmaster admitted. I've tried for so long to help maintain peace within our world that I've taken everything onto my shoulders. It was a mistake. One man cannot do everything alone. This past year has proven that, and so, this summer, I'll be handing in my resignation. I hope that in doing so, I can focus on becoming a better headmaster to all of you. Headmaster Dumbledore's speech ended on that shocking note. The stunned students were led out of the Great Hall, boarded their carriages, and were taken down to where the Hogwarts Express was waiting. Harry boarded the train with the others, locating an empty compartment that all 11 of them piled into. It didn't come as a surprise when he found himself right next to Daphne. While this hadn't bothered him much before, he was now distinctly aware of her presence. It was all because of that key. What did you all think of the headmaster's speech? Asked Tracy as the train started moving. You mean his statement about resigning as the Supreme Mugwump? Hannah asked. Yeah, that. It's a bold move, Blaise said. But, when you really think about it, his decision makes sense. How so? Asked Lisa. Because the headmaster is getting up there in years, Daphne replied. When he was younger, he could juggle 3 positions at once, but it's clear to those who've been watching him that he's not what he used to be. I think the headmaster is beginning to realize that as well. Age is an enemy that not even powerful wizards can battle, Harry said. Then he paused. Well, unless they make a philosopher's stone, but I doubt many people know how to create one of those. Everyone accepted that explanation, and the conversation soon changed from Headmaster Dumbledore to what everyone was doing for the summer. Of course, in bringing up the summer holidays, they couldn't avoid the topic of the Quidditch World Cup. The Quidditch World Cup hasn't been held in Britain for 5 years, Tracy was saying. It's going to be amazing. I bet you anything that the teams playing are going to be Bulgaria and Ireland. Terry sighed. For once I agree with you. Bulgaria has Victor Krum, and Ireland is known for having the greatest offense this season. Too bad I won't be able to see it. Why not? Asked Harry. Because tickets are expensive, Terry said, shrugging. A single ticket cost more galleons than most people can fork over, unless they're willing to accept gutter seats, but no one wants those. I could get us tickets, Harry said. What? Really? Asked Tracy, leaning forward and pinning him with a stare. Harry shrugged. Sure. We could even make this a group thing. What do you guys think? I've got no complaints, Terry said. I'm not a big Quidditch fan, but going somewhere together seems like it could be fun, Hannah admitted. After everyone had given their assent about planning to visit the Quidditch World Cup, everyone broke off into their own conversations. Only Harry didn't join in. Not that this was anything new. Everyone had grown used to him occasionally growing quiet. He did it so often that they sometimes teased him about it. Yet Harry's reason for being quiet was not because he was contemplating something deep. He simply couldn't think of anything to say. Daphne was sitting next to him. They were so close he could feel her thighs touching him through their robes. Her scent, a mixture of vanilla and something else, tickled his nose. I still don't know what to do. Harry had spent years actively avoiding romance whenever he could. Lisa talked about it so much in their youth that he'd grown absolutely sick of any mention of romantic things like dates and keys. It had gotten even worse after puberty. His body began to conflict with his mind. Desire and rationality clashed in a never-ending battle. Having avoided even the concept of romance for so long, Harry didn't know what to do now that some part of him craved it, or at least the physical aspect of romance. This is too much. Magic flowed through his body. He'd been born with strong magic. Perhaps it was because of that, but Harry's hormones often felt like they were raging out of control. While he'd gotten a grip on them thanks to his occlumency, the truth was that they were always lurking below the surface. He merely pushed them back. Harry glanced at Daphne. She doesn't deserve this. Daphne deserved a decisive answer. How could he do any less after everything she'd done to let him know about her feelings? I need to answer her. Yes, he would give her an answer. He didn't know what his answer would be, but Harry promised himself that he would give her an answer. She deserves it. Everyone exited the train after it pulled into platform 9 3/4. The first person to greet them was an enthusiastic Sirius, who wore the broadest grin Harry had ever seen. He wasn't alone. Standing beside him, or rather, behind him were several parents of his friends, the Davis, the Abbotts, and Madame Bones. They were only a few steps behind Sirius, who engulfed Harry in a hug that felt like it had cracked a few ribs. Harry, it's good to see you. It's been too long. It's only been a few weeks, Harry grunted. That might as well be forever. Whatever. I'm here now, so just put me down. I think you're breaking something. Sirius did as he was asked, but not until he finished swinging Harry around a few more times. With his back groaning in protest, Harry turned to watch as his friends were greeted by their parents. Tracy was being teased by her mum about something. It sounded like they were teasing her about Terry, which had caused both hers and Terry's faces to turn an unusual shade of puke green. Hannah and Susan's greetings were much more calm. Harry walked up to the group and exchanged greetings. It's good to see all of you. I'm glad you're doing well. Harry. Madame Bones smiled at him. It made her face appear less stern, despite how she was still wearing her monocle. It's good to see you, too. It looks like you've recovered from your ordeal. More or less. Harry shrugged. I heard about how you were kidnapped, Mrs. Davis said. I'm really glad you're okay. Me too. I don't know what would have happened if Madame Bones and the headmaster hadn't rescued me. It was a dangerous situation, Madame Bones agreed. No one knew what had really transpired. All of the Auror had been bound to a magical oath. They couldn't tell a soul, and Madame Bones had made up a story about a psychopath using Ginny to kidnap him. Everyone had bought it. Since there was no way to confirm if it was true or not, everyone had been forced to accept her explanation. Well, we're in a hurry, Mrs. Abbott said. So we'll be leaving now. You guys take care. Goodbye. Mr. Abbott waved at them. I'll see you guys later. Hannah waved as she left with her parents. We should be leaving soon, too, Madame Bones said to Susan. Right. Nodding, Susan said her goodbyes to everyone there. Harry was shocked when she gave Daphne a big hug, but then she left them all with a smile on her face. Oh, my, Harry, a voice said from behind them. Harry turned, and found himself plowing face first into a pair of beeps. He blinked several times. Then he looked up, into the smiling face of Celestina. This would have been the moment where he jerked himself away, but he was several seconds too slow. Celestina wrapped her arms around him in a tender hug. He wondered if she was trying to be motherly. It didn't feel very motherly, but that might have had something to do with the stiffness in his pants. Stupid hormones. Stupid. Stupid. Stupid hormones. I heard about what happened from Blaise, Celestina said. You really should learn to be more careful, Harry. She leaned down and whispered into his ear. Everyone who was allied to you was really worried when we learned about what happened. Even the old hag put aside her dislike of me to help search for you. Is that so? Harry mumbled, trying to control his breathing. This wasn't the time to be aroused by a beautiful older woman. I'll be more careful. That's all I ask. I sometimes feel like Mum loves you more than she loves me, Blaise mumbled. Now that's not true at all, Blaise. Celestina smiled, showing her perfect ivory teeth. I love you very much, but you never let me hug you like Harry does. Blaze turned his head. That's because it's embarrassing. You're so cute, his mother teased. Blaze and Celestina soon left. Celestina said it was because she didn't want to get into an argument with the old hag, which he believed meant she didn't want to see Neville's grandmother. Sirius tried to talk her to some, but he couldn't get away from Astoria, who apparently didn't want him talking to anyone else. It was probably a good thing that Blaze and Celestina left, because the Dowager Longbottom arrived several minutes later. She took a long, hard look at Harry, as though confirming for herself that he was fine. Then she nodded. You should be more careful. All of us were worried. Even that promiscuous wench was willing to set aside her difference to work with me. Harry didn't know what was more amusing. The fact that Celestina had said the exact same thing, or the fact that neither of them seemed to realize how similar they were. He wondered what that meant. He'd once heard a quote about birds of a feather, but these two were the antithesis of that. Terry's and Lisa's parents came next. He gave them his greetings and said goodbye to his friends, promising to write to them during the summer. Luna's father came after that. It was quite the first meeting. Hello. You must be Harry Potter. My daughter has told me a lot about you. Xenophilius Lovegood had the most eccentric appearance Harry had ever seen. Slightly cross-eyed, with shoulder-length white hair the same texture as dental floss, he wore a cap with a tassel hanging down the front, and his robes were the strangest shade of yellow. Upon their greeting, the man enthusiastically pumped Harry's hand. As that's so? Harry asked. Oh, yes. She has mentioned all of the problems you've been having. The man leaned in and whispered. Between you and me, I believe your problem stems from the Rotfang conspiracy that the ministry is hiding, but don't you worry. I'll find out everything soon. They cannot contain the truth forever. Right. He's an odd man, isn't he? Daphne asked as she stood beside him. Xenophilia had just left with Luna, who had given him, Daphne, and Astoria a big hug. Astoria, meanwhile, was still talking poor Sirius's ear off. That sort of crush cannot be healthy. He is, but I don't think that's a bad thing, Harry said. Me neither. Listen, Daphne, Harry started again, I wanted to ask if you could give me a bit of time. Daphne furrowed her brow. Time. Harry turned away. He could feel his cheeks turning red. I want to tell you how I feel, for you. The problem is that I don't really know how I feel. That's why. Would you mind waiting for just a little while longer? Next year, I promise I'll let you know how I feel. The stare that Daphne gave Harry made him feel beepy. It was like she was piercing his skin and staring into his soul. He was fortunate that the look only lasted for a few seconds before it was replaced with a smile. Has Astoria been pressuring you lately? She asked. Harry shook his head. No, I've been thinking about this since you keyed me. Well, I really liked it, but at the same time, I don't know my own feelings. I've always done my best to avoid romantic entanglements, so. I understand, Daphne said. Give me an answer when you're ready. I'll be waiting. The relief Harry felt in that moment was immeasurable. It was like a world's worth of weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Thanks, Daph. You're welcome, she said simply. Nathaniel Greengrass soon arrived to pick Daphne and Astoria up. While Astoria seemed reluctant to leave, Daphne tenderly held her sister's hand and soothed the girl as they departed. Harry watched them go. He hoped they would be okay. He didn't think Nathaniel would do anything to them, not until he could counter Celestina's blackmail, but he didn't feel comfortable leaving them with their father. I suppose there's nothing I can do about that. What were you and Daphne talking about? Asked Sirius. Nothing, Harry said softly. Nothing at all. Let's go home. Sure. As they made their way out of platform 9 3/4, Harry thought about all of the things he had to do this summer. There was so much that needed to get done. Several of the plans that he had made would be coming to fruition this summer. Harry smiled. Change was coming. He hoped the wizarding world was ready for it. That is the creepiest smile I've ever seen, Sirius remarked as he stared at his face. Shut up. Harry snapped. His blush would not be leaving anytime soon. To be continue. I hope you enjoyed this story. Also remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.